Welcome to the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors meeting. This day, August 8th, 2017. We're just returning now from closed session. And I'd like to pause briefly for a moment of reflection. Supervisor Berkowitz, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any introductions of new employees? All right, County Council, anything to report out of closed session?
No reportable action.
Excellent. Any corrections, deletions, additions to the agenda from the board at this time? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to go ahead and move to the consent agenda at this time, and possibly, board willing, we're going to be having a discussion which is item number 3, Oxford House presentation by Gene McVeigh. We'll pull item 18 from the consent agenda and take that up during that discussion. Could I have a motion
to
on the
approve.
consent agenda? We have a motion
So moved.
and a second. Public comment on consent agenda.
Donna Westfall, 1st District. I'll just make it very brief. Will we be able to have public comments after Gene McVeigh's presentation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Public comment. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the board. Kylie, can you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right. Budget transfer items. We have budget transfer items 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26, which is 0717, 08-01, 08-2, 08-3, 08-4, 08-5, 08-6, and 08-7.
Move for approval.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Public comment on budget transfer items. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the board. Kylie, can you please poll the vote?
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right. Is Heidi here, Jay? Okay. Nobody's here yet. They didn't think things were going to get started so soon. So let's go ahead and take up item 29 at this point, which is adopt the revision to the elected officials resolution effective July 28, 2017 as it pertains to elected department heads and the associated salaries scheduled to address a long-standing structural issue by recognizing continuous years of service longevity for County of Del Norte and address the Board of Supervisors party of succession planning and to create a budget smoothing biennial salary schedule which reflects 5% salary increments instead of term increases at 10% without changing the overall compensation within the salary schedule as requested by the County Administrative Officer. Mr. Serena?
So as the board is aware that we have been having long-term negotiations with elected department heads over the issues associated with longevity as well as with succession planning, meaning having an ability for an assistant or person below them to move into the job and be able to see a step up in compensation at that point. Presently, these department heads, all of the elected department heads, receive 10% at the end of their first term. This would allow for a 5% increase after the second year, and thereon until such time as the compensation ceases, which is in the overall salary schedule that's in the budget. This also allows for a 25 and 30-year compensation range for longevity, similar to all the other employees at this point, if a person is with the county that long. So in general, it is a smoothing process of allowing these department heads and the assistants to be more comparable in the sense of allowing somebody to step out of the assistant's role and into a department role and be compensated comparably.
Very good. Discussion from the board for CEO Serena. Supervisor Gitlin.
Mr. Serena, would you clarify the status of the elected officials as it pertains to we here at this dais, at the Board of Supervisors? Does this process involve this board in appearance voting for itself for this benefit or no?
This does not involve the Board of Supervisors in any way.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, I'd like to open it up for public comment at this time. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Do we have a motion on the table?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Kylie, can you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right, we're going to go ahead back to our timed items, which is public comment. Members of the public may address the board on matters which are within the jurisdiction of the board. If you are addressing the board regarding a matter listed on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comments until the board takes up that matter. Please try to limit your comments to 3 minutes or less.
My name is Donna Westfall, and I live in the 1st District. I don't subscribe to the triplicate for a number of reasons, like I don't like some of their reporting, which is why I started CrescentCityTimes.com, an online newspaper. But this morning, as I went into Fisherman's Restaurant for a 6 a.m. meeting, I saw this headline, Pen Air files for bankruptcy. My comment this morning concerns what I term Finnegan's Folly. The BOS approved $2.8 million to build a new terminal at the airport, Supervisor Gitlin being the sole voice to vote against it. And a cleanup fix-up would have cost a couple $100,000. What we needed to do was extend the runway and the apron, but instead $2.8 million was expended and is being expended to build a new terminal. So if we're looking at losing Pen Air, then we have to look for another carrier that has prop playing capacity. So I've come up with some other ideas to make the new terminal a profit center. We can turn it into an events center for weddings, funerals, and bar mitzvahs, or turn it into a safe and sober house or a homeless shelter for the homeless, since it won't be next door to anybody that would complain and object. Or here's something that could be a real money maker, since North Korea claims their missiles can now reach U.S. soil. Why don't we turn it into an anti-ballistic missile site? And maybe that will turn our whole economy around. Thank you so much.
Public comment. Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. Supervisors Hemmingson or Cowan, I know you guys sit on the Board of Coast Regional Airport Authority, and there's been a lot of talk about the recent happenings in the newspaper and on other blogs here in the community. I'm not sure if you could help address this for the community or not, about what's potentially going on and our involvement.
Yeah, it's pretty premature to get all, I mean, we're certainly concerned. There are some options. The Department of Transportation is in the process of putting in a hold-in order, which means that Pin Air must stay and fulfill their contractual agreement. So in that respect, we will have an air carrier until they are replaced. We do have a couple options on the table that we're looking into. The concern is there, but you know, I don't think that we have to worry about turning it into an anti-ballistic missile site at this point. And it's not really funny, but that's what you get with the Crescent City Times, is kind of just a jokester type attitude. No facts, just opinion and innuendo. So I don't have a lot to add to the airport situation at this time. It's relatively new. We just found out about it on Friday, or I found out about it on Friday. I don't know if anybody else knew about it before then, but I found out about it on Friday, and we're working very hard to get that rectified.
Thank you, Supervisor. All right, we're going to go ahead and move to item number...
Mr. Chairman, do I have an opportunity to weigh in on that also?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Supervisor Berkowitz.
Pin Air, because they receive a federal subsidy, they have asked the FAA for permission to cease serving our area. If Pin Air should shift to a Chapter 7 bankruptcy instead of an 11 bankruptcy, we could be left without any service in the near future. Considering that our only airport runway can't accommodate larger planes, we could be stuck with the same bidders that we had last time, like Seaport Airlines with only 7 seats, or maybe Redwood Airlines with only 9 seats. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a suggestion, and that is that you chair an ad hoc committee that can research all of the stumbling blocks that are getting in the way of a longer airport runway, which will accommodate modern-day jets so that we can attract larger planes, something of the area of maybe a 74 passenger planes. But we need to have a plan in place that when Pin Air leaves, we need to have something that we can, at least some kind of movement that we can get that will attract larger airplanes.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Mr. Chair?
Comment?
I actually think that's a valid idea, and I'd like to see you, Mr. Chairman, lead that committee to find out what these stumbling blocks are. Perhaps the real reason is we don't have a 21st century airport. We have a 1980s type airport with a short field, accommodating basically obsolete aircraft. And that may be the challenge there. So this was a discussion that this board heavily engaged in 2004, where the runways were going to be lengthened. And then it fell off the tracks, so to speak. So I would hope that out of this discussion and this latest left turn from Pin Air, that we begin to look for remedies to find out how to lengthen our airfield and do it as his Board of Supervisors, since we have so much invested. So I concur with Supervisor Berkowitz. I think it's a great idea for you to chair this meeting. Thank you. That ad hoc committee. Thank you.
Any other supervisors want to weigh in at this time? I mean, basically what I'm hearing is for us to create an ad hoc committee moving forward in the future where we would get out in the open discussions that have occurred in the past about lengthening our runway, if I'm hearing things correctly.
Well, I think that information is already there. The airport authority has that information. Matter of fact, before the airport authority was formed, lengthening of the runway was discussed and can still be discussed. And I'm not saying that it's out of the realms of possibilities, but you know, you're talking about probably 10 to 15 years in order to get environmental documents and to get the runway lengthened, Washington Boulevard moved. It's quite a process. There's a lot of things involved. It's not just snap your fingers and we lengthen the runway. The discussion has been made at length for years This is not a new thing. This is not some light bulb just came on and, oh gee, why don't we just lengthen the runway? Been discussed, it's been talked about. It's a very long process, and it's not an easy fix. Not to say that it shouldn't be talked about again, we certainly can, but the information is there.
Supervisor Berkowitz, after hearing, and you've been around here longer than I have, you're probably very familiar with a lot of these discussions, and at least I would hope you're very familiar with a lot of these discussions and reasons why steps were taken, specifically processes with the Federal Aviation Commission on how to proceed with the steps that we've taken out there at our airport, and more importantly, through the direction of the Border Coast Regional Airport Authority. Is there a particular reason that you want to bring this back
Well,
forward
Mr.
now?
Chairman, sure, Mr. Chairman, we have 2 new board members that have not had the pleasure of being in on the discussions that have been held in the past. Also, it's been quite a while since this has been discussed, and even longer than since decisions have been made by former boards. So we need to really bring this up to speed and let's see what kinds of changes have been made and what kind of influence that we can make as a new board. Don't forget that we've had a new congressman since then, we've had a new senator, we've had new assemblymen. The whole situation's changed since the last time we've had discussions on this, and that's why I think it's appropriate for you to lead this.
Let's do this. Let's do this then. Since there appears to be a process of education for board members as stated, let's go ahead and bring forward Matthew Leitner to actually give us a facts-based presentation. And the community could share in it at that time and the knowledge that has been gained through past conversations. Once that conversation takes place, if there's still an urgency to form an ad hoc committee that I would chair, be more than willing to do so. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and agendize for a future meeting a presentation by Border Coast Regional Airport Authority Director Matthew Leitner to present to the board.
I think that's a very good choice.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I just wanted to add one more thing about Pen Air potentially leaving and the timing of all that, and assure everybody that the conversations are being had. The RFPs, I believe, are going out today, and contact has been made with other airlines that were interested in the first place, and the conversations have started. So and neither of them are the ones Mr. Berkowitz mentioned. Those weren't names of people who have stepped forward before. So those conversations have started, and hopefully things will go smoothly and we can bring in a new airline.
Very good. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move to our timed agenda item, which is at 10:15, which is a trauma-informed multi-tiered system of support. Overview, how schools and communities can proactively, systematically support the success of children exposed to toxic stress through culturally responsive approach presentation. Presentation today is by Chris and Courtney Diakos. Diakos. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Christina Alton, and I am the Director of Foster Youth Services. And my role is to support foster youth success in the schools. I collaborate on a daily basis with child welfare, juvenile probation, CASA, Remy Vista, and juvenile courts. As you may know, foster youth suffer from very poor academic outcomes, being retained a grade, low test scores, failing out of high school. In fact, our local youth this past year, our local foster youth, 6 out of the 6 seniors, only 3 were able to graduate. 21% of our foster youth in our schools are in special education. And in fact, that's similar to the general population, which used to be in prior years around 16% and recently has been at 20%. Our foster youth were suspended 55 times this past year during the school year. So in order to better respond to these concerns in the schools and within our community, and since foster youth are our own mandate, state mandated to take care of them, the schools, in collaboration with Building Healthy Communities and in collaboration with the county, and other agencies, and tribal agencies, we've been working on building capacity in trauma-informed practices. So I'd like to introduce you to actually Chris and Courtney Dacos and also Vincent Perez, who will just give you a very brief summary of how their work fits into our work of unlocking our children's potential, because they are our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to the Board of Supervisors for having us today. Just going to tell you a little bit about what we do and how we hope to help your community this week and moving forward. So my name is Courtney Dacos, and I am an experienced educator, school administrator, principal, and have transitioned into consulting work with my husband Chris and our partner Vincent and other members of our team. We consult with schools throughout Washington State. We're also working in Minnesota, and I've worked in the past year also in Illinois and Maryland and Wisconsin. And we're supporting schools to look holistically as a community at what the needs are of their kids and how we can better support all students and adults in a community such as yours, where there are all kinds of compounding factors. So we'll talk to you more about that. I'll let my team introduce themselves.
Our consulting also is based in the latest research based off the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. I don't know if you're familiar with that or have heard of it before, but it's going into its 20th year now. And it's increasing our understanding of what trauma really is. We're not talking about celebrating or a celebration of victimizing or anything like that. What we're talking about, trauma is sustained toxic stress. Sustained toxic stress could be food insecurity, housing insecurity, parental discord, and with that, students are developing maladaptive behaviors in that process, and they bring it into the school, which leads towards suspension. We're going to be able to teach educators evidence-based interventions, actually how to modify those behaviors so that it leads towards student success. Now, we've heard from the superintendent yesterday that special education identification has increased up to 20% in this district. Nationally, it's 15% or less, and with our model, which is also based off response to intervention, which is over a 25-year model, that model indicates it really should be only about 5%. So we know that we can actually bring evidence-based interventions so that teachers can address students directly in the classroom rather than having to refer out and deal with that right there and then. So all discipline, all academic interventions could be addressed right there and then with these interventions.
Thank you. My name is Vincent. Recently, I have served with the Association of Washington School Principals, and this is something AWSP has really looked into with the Dicoses last summer. We toured around the state to 4 different sites and served over 300 administrators, really thinking about how to shift their districts so that, in my language, we systematize empathy. And that sounds kind of, I think, a little tricky, but when we really bring an empathetic approach to seeing what's happening for a child and why they're acting up, MTSS, multi-tier systems of support, really helps address that and equips our teachers and administrators and probation officers and nurses. This is hitting all systems. And so in my work, I've had the opportunity to serve with the Washington State Education Department. It's called OSPI. And we are forming the language for the state around what this looks like for schools across our area.
There's a slide, I think the next slide of what we provided that would show the model. I'm not sure.
And we've taught this model. Is there fancy? Okay. We've taught this model also at Seattle University, focusing on behavioral disorders. We've taught this at the University of Washington for people who are in training to become principals, and the evidence is there.
So just to briefly explain what this pyramid represents, you can see that on the bottom it names culturally responsive pedagogy and trauma-informed practices. And so this week we have the pleasure of working for 3 days with many members of your community. It's quite impressive, actually, the large number of partnerships that will be there. So not only Del Norte teachers and administrators, but probation officers, members of the tribal councils, nurses, social workers, many different kinds of practitioners coming together, which is an incredible opportunity to talk about how could this universal model actually be implemented beyond the school walls and within all of the agencies that are supporting kids. So if you look at the model, what is different about our approach is that we believe that all practitioners who work with children fundamentally understanding how toxic stress and trauma impact development and what that means for behavior, as well as thinking really critically about what is the culture of the students that I'm working with, how does the instruction or the social service or the institution really reflect those cultures. We're going to go really deep with folks over the course of those 3 days to reflect on what's already working in your institutions, as well as where are the areas to build upon that, and then talking about the evidence-based interventions that we know support all kids and children, but in particular support those who struggle when they show up every day to regulate themselves and to feel safe in that environment. So we're going to get really deep with those folks to think about those practices, and by the end of the week, we're hoping that we can support each practitioner in the room to take on a couple of these strategies, so to plan an implementation plan and think about what does it look like in their environment to try on those research-based strategies.
We're hoping after this training that there's going to be a common language throughout the community for all interventions. So an intervention for student behavior doesn't just stop at school. It will go on to like the child care or whatever after-school program that child's engaged in. So there's common language across all organizations so that if a child walks into one environment, they don't have to code switch, they don't have to figure out what someone is saying to them. They know exactly what's being said and what those expectations are.
I'll only add that this is a public health prevention model. It's nothing new. And when we look at a tier 1, a universal approach, I believe what this does is give local control. We worked with a school who was an alternative school. They were housed out on university campus, and there were principals saying, our kids are coming in smelling of marijuana. We know they're high. And for a universal intervention, all students in that school need drug and alcohol prevention education. That may not work for the school across the way. So this gives real local control to say who are our clients, who are our students, what do they all need here in our community.
And we're not a train and dash. We are cultivating a relationship with the school district. We've been speaking with Christina Alton, I think, 6 months now? Ongoing conversations, sharing research, and slowly cultivating that relationship. And typically when we come into a school district, we're looking at least a 2 to 3 year commitment.
So I just want to add, if you can move on to the next slide, just to give you another picture of what we're looking at. You know, we believe that for all children to be successful, there are many angles that need to be addressed, and part of what we do is help schools and systems and other practitioners take stock of what's already working well. So for example, we know here in the county there's been an early literacy initiative that's showing some significant results, doubling the readiness of kindergartners, for example. So part of, as Vincent was describing, our model is very constructivist. We want to look at what's already working in your community, what are all the strengths of the many folks coming together, and how do we build something successful together. And the last slide, if you're interested, is just some of the key objectives of what we hope to accomplish over the next 3 days. So I don't know if we're beyond our time, but if there are any questions or anything else you'd like us to share.
Thank you. Questions from the board? No. I'll personally say I had a long discussion with Superintendent Harris about the presentation today and how it relates to what the county is doing. And there is clear umbrella about this community being so small, working together and making sure this universal approach moves forward. As you're probably aware and have had many conversations with Christina, Del Norte County has adopted a Children's Bill of Rights, and that Children's Bill of Rights is focused around the child's need to succeed. And more importantly, it's focused around various components that help that child get there. And our agencies, whether we're a school district or whether we're a county Department of Health and Human Services, not working in a silo, but working together for that child's betterment. The programs that I'm hearing today, and I specifically wanted this to be shared with the board, were extremely important to showing that we're just not a school district. We're just not a county board of supervisors. We all care about whether or not a child has the ability to succeed, and you guys are touching at the heart of that. And I hope with all the agency participation, with what Christina is doing to help bring us all together, will help get us there, and eventually to where at least some of our goals right now, which we're adopting, is 3 Read 23, which is that children's literacy piece, we can achieve.
Absolutely.
I'd like to open it up for public comment, just in case there's some public comment on this item. Really thank you much for the presentation today. All right. Please, Heather, come on board.
I'll just share that I think Christina Alton does an excellent job in Health and Human Services and Child Welfare, especially enjoy working with her, and to see an evidence-based training brought and presented as a collaboration to invite other agencies, we really appreciate that. So.
Yeah. And we sure do too, and I think you'll see a lot of willingness from those that you'll be working with this week to participate in this process and have an open mind on how to get there together. Thank you again. All right, we're going to go ahead and move to our 10:25 timed agenda item, which is an Oxford House presentation by Jean McVeigh. Good morning, Jean. Welcome. I'm going to apologize in advance for having this discussion, but at the same time, there's been a lot of discussion in public about the Oxford House programs, and I thought it best, as we also have an agenda item today that will discuss funding for the Oxford House, to really get an open, transparent process, what the Oxford House is all about.
I actually brought some information. For
If you want to bring that to Kylie, that would be terrific. Thank you, Gene.
So my name is Gene McVeigh. I'm an outreach worker for Oxford House. I've been employed with Oxford for 6 years. I got sober February 12, 2007, got home from treatment, and moved in with Mom and Dad, and you know, unfortunately for those of us in recovery, we moved back to those places where our biggest enablers, or moved back to our old neighborhoods, or moved back to where we were getting in all that trouble. It just wasn't working out for me. And I had a friend that I used to run and gun with that had moved into an Oxford House. And I started going, staying a couple nights a week just because I was missing something in my recovery and I just didn't know what it was. And I started staying a few nights a week and fell in love with the Oxford House model. It was a bunch of guys that were like-minded, that understood what I was going through, and that could call me out on stuff that nobody else could really do it. I mean, I was able to look them eye to eye. They were my peer, and so I could hear what they were saying as opposed to maybe my PO or Mom or Dad. You know, they hadn't lived it, so they couldn't tell me, basically. And so I moved into that house, and you know, those guys walked me through a whole lot of stuff. Dad died 18 months sober. My dad passed away. I didn't have to drink or use over it. You know, but those guys surrounded me with a whole bunch of love and tough love at times. You know, when I got on the pity pot and wanted to just say, poor me, you know, my dad died, they were like, look, you got stuff to do. You know, you still got to live your life. And you got to honor your dad by staying sober. You know, that kind of stuff. You know, to walk me through some of that stuff that I don't know that I would have made it through. You know, Oxford House has been going since 1975. We've been doing this 42 years. You know, last year the Surgeon General cited us as being a leader in the recovery housing field. You know, SAMHSA deems us an evidence-based practice. Trying to think of the university now. DePaul University has been studying us for 30 years. There's a bunch of studies on Oxford House, and one of the studies, I'm going to be off maybe a little bit on the percentage, but the study says that if you live in an Oxford House for 18 months and you participate, you're not just there because it's cheap rent, that you're there, you're participating, and you're active in your recovery, the chances of you remaining sober indefinitely, long term, is about 79%. You know, I personally, I get paid from Oxford House. I don't draw a dime out of that house, any of the houses here. That money gets paid into the house as rent, and it stays in the house. You know, they vote to, you know, once they develop a prudent reserve and they're able to financially be self-sufficient, they can vote to lower their rent. You know, they can vote if they need new furniture. They can vote democratically to buy new furniture. Every nickel that gets paid into that house stays in the house. None of it leaves by way of me or by way of Oxford House. If they want to make a donation, some houses, the house I live in makes a $50 a month donation to Oxford Inc. And it's specifically for areas that we don't have a contract with, that we can loan a house, in, like these houses came out of that fund. People have donated because they're grateful to be living in an Oxford House. They make a $50 a month donation to Oxford House, and it goes into a fund to be able to come into areas like this where we don't have a contract and we can open a house. think that's about all I got.
Oh. Well, I really appreciate it, and I'm going to use this opportunity, Gene, and you don't necessarily have to answer these questions, but there's been a lot of concern raised by the public since we started this conversation with the board and approval of item 17, which is on our agenda today. Many questions come out about zoning around Oxford houses, how many people could be in a house, those kind of things. And I would like to answer those questions at this time. You don't necessarily have to answer them. I would like to bring up our Community Development Department, Health and Human Services, but we have received a lot of letters, and I'd like to start clearing the air publicly about the Oxford House and, more importantly, what its involvement is. Director Snow, maybe you could kind of walk us down the road what Health and Human Services involvement is with Oxford House, and more importantly, how the county payment works.
Sure. And all of this is really, I'm kind of surprised to have to be responding to it because it's not new information. It's detailed in our contract. This is a new contract with this house, but we have a long-standing existing relationship with Oxford House. We have other similar contracts with other providers as well. So there's in the contract attachment B, which has payment. So basically what happens is if somebody is getting services with Health and Human Services and we identify that they might benefit from this sort of thing, we would refer them. We get invoiced monthly, and every dollar that we pay is tied to an individual. So if they're there and we're supporting them, their name is attached to that. It doesn't go to support Oxford House, it goes to support the individual women and their service. It's part of their treatment plan with us.
Great. Questions for Director Snow?
Well, while you're on that subject, these contracts are not to exceed contracts, is that correct?
Correct.
And so there's been some question about what happens to the money that is not used.
So the funding that we use is specifically for residential. It's been earmarked for that. We can't use it for anything else. If it doesn't get used, it just sits there. I'll use last year with the men's house as an example. We had an agreement for $13,500. That was passed. We only ended up utilizing $7,600, something like that, which is an amount that doesn't actually require us to have an agreement. So there were many men who became self-sufficient and stayed, so we weren't supporting them financially anymore. So we didn't use the full amount.
Thank you. Questions for Director Snow? All right. Thank you. We might have some more questions, but
here.
I know you'll be here. Director Kunstler, can you join us, please? Mr. Hooper, too. Boy. Okay, then we'll take Mr. Hooper. Good morning, Randy.
Good morning.
I'm hoping you could help enlighten us about ordinances around the houses, if there are some, if they're not. How does a house evolve? More importantly, what input or process does the county have whether or not a house is located in a residential neighborhood?
Sure. So under California housing and actually state and federal housing law, there's a notion of what's called transitional housing. And so in this case, and I provided a memo to county council that kind of elaborated on what I'm going to touch on here in a second. But essentially, transitional housing is distinguished from a residential care facility. A residential care facility would be a licensed facility where there's care provided directly on site. In transitional housing, the idea is that you're basically viewing the unit as a family unit, which we have to. And again, under statute, under case law, families don't necessarily need to be biological units. They can be essentially, if it functions like a family, it is a family. You can't put a cap on that number under this definition. And so again, what we looked at it, we did an analysis, and the use in this case appears to qualify under that transitional housing. The transitional housing notion, again, one of the things that it really aims to do is to provide for housing opportunities to keep people from becoming homeless. And many cities and counties have looked at their housing elements in particular as a way to implement this idea of transitional housing, which we've done. It's actually incorporated into our adopted county housing element. And again, it doesn't put a cap on the number of people. And so if care services were being provided, if it were to be a licensed facility, there would be a cap. That number is 6. Up to 6 people in a residential care facility you can do as an outright permitted use within any zone district. If you exceed the number of 6 people within a residential care facility, you have to get a conditional use permit. But again, this is distinguished from a residential care facility. This is transitional housing, again, unlicensed family unit. And again, we looked at the charter, we looked at the information that's provided by Oxford House. The unit seems to operate as a family unit. They operate within the housing rental market just like any other housing rental, family that would be looking to get rental housing. And so from that perspective, it wouldn't be subject to the same planning commission discretionary permitting requirements that a care facility would.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Hooper? Okay. Liz, would you like to follow up with anything to add to that?
So just to add, when this came up, we normally don't, the contracts that we approve as to form, they go through our office, but we don't on a regular basis check the, the zoning of each and every facility that that might be on the agenda. And so we spent a significant amount of time working with CDD after these questions came up. And so it's just, I would reiterate everything that Mr. Hooper said and say that there is significant amount of case law that's been devoted to this subject when there are, when counties do attempt to zone this type of a house, and we don't have those zoning ordinances at this time, and therefore there was never a planning commission proceeding, which would be a use permit, which would require the public notice. And so that's why neighbors didn't get noticed the same way they wouldn't if a 10 family, traditional family, if you, so to speak, a mother, a father, and 8 children came into the neighborhood, the public wouldn't get notified about that. Or a group of roommates who wanted to live together who, had similar things, or they just chose to live together. The California Constitution protects privacy, and that plays into the case law. So how you define a family cannot be on those traditional notions of what a family is, a mother, a father, and 8 kids, or a group of people living together to support each other. So the Oxford House model, I believe their website goes into detail about some of the cases that have been at the Supreme Court level when local agencies have attempted to regulate those things. California is more specific because there is a privacy element in California law. There's also the California Zoning and Planning Law, as well as the Federal Fair Housing Act. So all of those things come into play. And so that is likely the reason that our county does not have that type of a zoning law, because we could possibly run afoul of the Constitution, fair housing, California law in doing so. And because we don't have that law, our CDD didn't require them to go through that process. So I'm happy to answer any more questions or give you specific case law. And if you request, I did do a memo on this, which I can provide to the board if the board requests it necessary. Thanks.
Very good. Appreciate those. Questions for Liz?
No more questions.
Okay, let's go ahead and open it up for comment from the board.
I just wanted to say, originally when this started, I recused myself to err on the side of caution because of everything that was coming at me. And but after I did that, I reached out to the FPPC, and I don't have a conflict, even though it was applied that I do. And I want that to be said. There is no conflict, and I can speak and vote on this issue. The good news is that over the last month, I've gotten to know the girls and the women in the house because of this. Unfortunately, there was a lot of misquotes and some very ignorant statements that have come out publicly. And the girls have had to deal with it, and that's not okay with me. Things have been done from this board that it's not okay with me. This is a good program. The women in this house are wonderful, and we should be supporting this. And I feel like this was brought up because I was originally involved in the sale of the house. And, it was a ridiculous situation. And I've spent a lot of times and conversations with the FPPC to make sure that I wasn't, and that I am doing my job correctly. And I just wanted to say to you guys, way to go. You guys are a true example of what we want to see in our community and being members of our society. And I'm proud of all of you guys, very much so. And I really believe that Mr. Gitlin here owes you all a public apology for his behavior and his statements and knocking on your door and demanding to come in your house and going up and down your neighborhood and knocking on your neighbors' homes. That wasn't okay. It's not okay with me. And I hope he does publicly apologize to you guys. Thank you.
Supervisor Cowan, thank you. Any further comments from the board before I open it up for public comment? Supervisor Gitlin.
I'm doing my job. I'm doing the wishes of the constituents who put me on this dais right here. You asked me to represent you. I don't doubt for a moment the work, Gene, you are doing is exemplary. We sat down, we had a long conversation about this. I even asked you about all of your houses. Which ones are subsidized? There's a house in Oxford House in Bakersfield. You're aware of that. They don't take a dime of public money. They are self-sustaining. And the real dollars that are coming into this property, each of the tenants pay $400. I congratulate those people who are trying to turn their lives around. I support that. And you're doing it on your dime. So 10 times 4 is $4,000. $2,000 goes to the rent. That's a good rent in that area. And $2,000 goes to the operation of the property. So I asked that question. Why is it necessary to accept these funds from the state? And Mr. McVeigh, please stand up and tell me you didn't seek these funds out. They came to you. And as your literature indicates, you are self-sustaining and you can operate alone, as indicated by other properties around the state who do not take public money. So I'm not here to quibble and talk to you about me doing my job and asking neighbors how they felt about this issue. I don't apologize for that, and I won't. I'll go around and I'll ask, what do you feel about this? Do you think this county should be funding this? And I got responses that, well, may not be universally acceptable to some people on this board. But we're going to ask those questions. Not that you're not doing the great work you're doing. I applaud that, Mr. McVeigh. But whether the state should be engaged in supporting this. And apparently, I see that you're doing great work, and my decision is not whether there's going to be a halfway house here. That's a fact, and we all know that. It's not subject to zoning oversight, planning commission, what have you, and I learned that. But this was also thrust upon me in the 11th hour and 59th minute before a Tuesday meeting. This is where it was going to be, 2:30 loft, and I went out and had to do my work quickly. As Supervisor Cowan says, do your homework. Well, I did. And after you and I met, Mr. McVeigh, I saw this in a different light. I saw what you did. You sat down. You were very open, very candid. I think a lot of this could have been avoided had that conversation taken place before we had this kind of unfortunate situation. But it's a healthy one, and one in which the public has now informed CDD. You have clarity on how these issues are now being dealt with in the future. And I wish you good luck on that. I think these tenants who operate there, I applaud them. But the question continues to say, why is it necessary that you have these funds? And now I'm told you may not need as much of these funds as necessary. It's kind of a buffer. That's what I'm hearing from you. Please come up here and correct me of that. But our meeting was a productive one. As far as me being rude and throwing a badge, that simply did not happen. I came in there, I knocked on the door, showed my business card, I was invited in. And I talked to the girls, and I said, who's in charge? Nobody. Okay. Then you came on the phone, Mr. McVeigh, and you told me about your program, and I left. That was basically it. And then I went and did my due diligence. I walked up and down the neighborhoods, not just on that street, but J Street, Mackin. These are the people that sent me here to this board. And I share that with you because that's what we're supposed to do. We don't operate just how we feel about something. We have to seek out those people whose opinions put us here in these chairs, and I'm very proud of what I did. And if nothing else, we now have clarity on an issue that won't come up again, hopefully, in the future. So thank you for allowing me to say those comments.
Supervisor Hemmingson.
Just from what I've heard and the complaints that I've seen, I think there's maybe some misinterpretation of what a board member's job is. We're not the Gestapo or the Nazis. We don't go knocking on people's doors and force our way in to satisfy our own needs, I guess. I'm very disappointed in behavior of the supervisors in not doing their due diligence, of not finding out information that is readily available, that is easy to ascertain, and just reading the contract and finding out these things. It's really, really disappointing. I don't read the blog that's on the internet that there's a couple of reporters in the audience. I don't read it because it's not factual. They don't do their homework either. They put out things that are totally false, and they're looking for a reaction. So they're wanting to drop the bomb, and so then everybody's up in arms about it because a supervisor did not do his job, and that's very disappointing to me.
Supervisor Berkowitz.
Wow. You'd think the sky was falling. Whoa, one supervisor asks us a question, and holy smokes, what do we get? 2 articles in the triplicate, 1 editorial that's scathing to board members. I can't believe it. I don't think we've ever had a situation here where we've had 1 supervisor ask a question and all hell breaks loose. I'm just pleased that this issue is finally getting resolved today. I'm tired of hearing about it.
I'd like to open it up for public comment. Please approach the dais.
My name is Nicky Williams, and I live at 233 East Law,
morning.
adjacent to the new home in the neighborhood. And you don't sit in my backyard and listen to these angels have their discussions about things they did in jail, inserting their cellmate's toothbrush in their anus. These angels are not wearing halos. You're worried about public perception? If that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know what the words mean. I'm disgusted with this whole chain of events. It's not your backyard that's being invaded. The only one doing his job here, as far as I can turn, is Mr. Gitlin. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
Good morning, Board. Sunny Valero. I live in Delaware County. A while ago, I worked in a health clinic here in Crescent City where I didn't just see basic women's health issues, but it opened my eyes to the door of true concerns that the women in Delaware County face in regards to addiction, domestic violence, rape, and other circumstances that are completely heartbreaking. There's a loss of hope many women face here in Delaware County, and I'm thankful that that was a part of my life, that I got to know many of these women. I know women and men who have been through different recovery programs or transitional housing in Delaware County. Some have been successful, some have not been. Some have had to take a couple of times to get it right. I come to the board today because my concern is this. This community has been completely inappropriate in their statements, insinuations, accusations towards women of the Oxford House Sequoia. With all due respect, Mr. Gitlin and the community, you owe these ladies an apology. Mr. Gitlin, by showing your badge or a business card and using your title as a Board of Supervisor to gain entry into their home, you took advantage of your position to question them. That created an uncertainty and an uneasiness to a group of ladies who are already working on self-confidence, learning how to love themselves, and working hard to defend themselves. And implied to them you had an authority. These women do not want any trouble, and you took advantage of their fears to gain access into their home. Frankly, as a member of the community, it makes me feel extremely uneasy that an elected official thinks they have a right to come to someone's home. This is a poor representation of the Board of Supervisors, our community, and our county. Board of Supervisors and Delaware County residents, addiction's here. No matter what you do, it's here. It's debilitating our county and our community. It's stealing our kids away. I don't understand why we as a community can't be supportive and rally behind these men and women who are ultimately fighting for their lives. We're fine and supported as long as it's in someone else's backyard and not in our own. These women are working, they're getting their children back, rebuilding relationships, going to school. I'm extremely disappointed in our community and the low blows, name calling in regards to these women. How completely disgraceful and disrespectful we have become. A recovering addict is a son, daughter, grandchild, brother, sister, mother, father. It's not going to be perfect. Addiction's not pretty, but they're on the road to recovery. Recovery is hard enough, let alone worry about what decisions the Board of Supervisors or the community is doing regarding your home. I encourage you to talk to these men and women, know their stories, understand their issues, listen to their concerns. They're not discounted because of their past. They're trying to rise above. Familiarize yourself with addiction and recovery before you're quick to judge. It's easy for anyone to pass the judgment if you don't know or understand. Get out and know the people who are affected by your decision in a proper way. These women are human. They're not less than. They should not be taken advantage of. They're examples of other women in our community who are struggling to show them that recovery is real. It can happen for them too, and no matter what happens in their lives, that does not mean it has to frame their future. Give these folks and ladies a hope instead of trying to tear them down. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
Donna Westfall, 1st District, and I'd like to thank you, Supervisor Gitlin, because I called you and I started asking questions about what is this Oxford House, what does it do, and why is it getting applying for funds. And I'd also like you to know that I have 5 children and 12 grandchildren, all clean and sober now, but that wasn't always the case. So I know what it is to deal with addictions. Now, on August 2nd, I sent an email to Gene McVeigh, and after talking to him on the phone, I told him, I own rentals. This sounds like a wonderful profit opportunity and a good program. But I'm also president of the local Taxpayers Association, editor of an online newspaper, CrescentCityTimes.com. We ran an opinion piece by Linda Sutter, wherein she questioned some of the rules about men staying overnight up to 3 times a week in a household that also allows children rent-free. And actually, I was looking for financial information from him because I'd already done my research on the Oxford House's successes and failures nationwide, and I don't understand all the financials. So I wanted to know how many Oxford Houses an area like Crescent City can handle. I see that there are only 6 in the entire state of California. 2 of those are in Crescent City, while there are over 155 in Oregon. I'd like to know what kinds of government reporting takes place, if any, and what kinds of things does he pay for as programs director, and how does he get paid as a programs director? But here's my biggest question. In speaking with Daryl at Oxford Houses Incorporated in Maryland, area code 301-587-2916, he told me there is no contract with the state of California, that Oxford Houses in California won't get any state funds. And if that's the case, then how is it possible for Gene McVeigh and Heather Snow to come before this board and ask for funds for Oxford House or any other Oxford House in this area? I understand states have loans in place for up to $4,000, which is supposed to be repaid in 24 months. But I'd like to know, chapter and verse, where it allows state funds or county funds to be used year in and year out. First, $40,000 was requested, and now today $26,000 is requested. And it seems the very antithesis of self-sustaining philosophy expounded by the Oxford House. So in conclusion, my issue is not, is it good, is it bad? My issue is solely questioning whether state or county taxpayer dollars should be used to fund Oxford Houses in violation of their own philosophy.
Public comment.
Linda Sutter, 5th District. Anyone can open a recovery house such as the Oxford Sequoia, including companies and businesses that know nothing about the drug and alcohol treatment field. No training is mandated, no background checks are compulsory, no government oversight is required. Recovery house rules vary, as does the enforcement of those rules. According to the guidelines by the original Oxford Housing in Maryland, there can be no more than 2 people per room and up to 10 people per house. Is it unrealistic or unreasonable to be concerned of the following? Women who do not have children can have their boyfriend stay the night up to 3 nights a week, according to the Oxford House Rule number 35. If there are 2 people per room and a man spends the night, who will be bumped out of their room that night for a boyfriend to spend the night, or does everyone share the same room? Where are the children when sexual encounters are occurring? How are the bathrooms shared between the rooms? Who monitors what type of men are allowed to come into the women's Oxford House? Are they former drug and alcohol abusers? Are they parolees? Do they behave inappropriately around children? Are they undiscovered child molesters? Is it unrealistic or unreasonable to ask why social services is handing out $40,000 when, according to 42 United States Code, Section 300X-25, provision states to use block grant money to establish a recovery house under the State Recovery House Revolving Loan Program, whereupon application can receive $4,000 startup money, which must be paid back in 2 years at a rate of $170 per month. This is after the House has filed for a charter. Who's done their homework here on this board? Just tell me, raise your hand. I have no doubt this is an excellent program. However, where is the fiscal responsibility in giving $40,000 to a newly formed organization that is declared self-funded? Director Heather Snow nor Jean McVeigh have disclosed to the public what services the Oxford House will be providing for $40,000. And these questions should be answered in this public forum so there is clear transparency. As far as Ms. Cowan, if you're basing your opinions upon emotion instead of researching the facts, then you are not a great district supervisor. Thank you.
Public comment?
Hey, good morning. Wesley Nunn, county resident. I'm here only to address certain fundamental flaws in the contract itself. Okay? The Oxford program itself seems to be a pretty good program. The model is good. But in the contract, I don't know if you have that in front of you, but some folks were under the impression that this was a contract with Oxford House Incorporated in Maryland, or at least Oxford House Sequoia in Crescent City. It is not. This contract is with the contractor, and he is an individual, and that is Jean McVeigh. So do not confuse contracting with Jean McVeigh with Oxford Houses Incorporated, okay? Because it is not. That's according to the contract. Now, the payment, proof of that is the payment. That's on page 1 of the agreement. Number 3, county shall pay contractor. That contractor is clearly Jean McVeigh. So hopefully you all understand that. Now, what services are we paying for? Those are on attachment A. And there are 3 things listed. Number 2 is pointless because it says they agree to comply with law. They already have to do that, so that's redundant. Number 1, contractor agrees to provide certain female clients. It doesn't say female clients with services, it says provides female clients. Now, what does that mean? That he actually provides the clients? I don't think that's what it means. So this is a nonsensical sentence, okay? Maybe it can be explained. Maybe county council, maybe Jean McVeigh himself can get up here and explain this one out. But I don't think he's providing certain female clients. I think it's intended to be services. So what are those services? Well, let's go to number 3. The only thing offered here are weekly written reports for tens of thousands of dollars. They don't have to meet any criteria. There are reports throughout the nation that some of the Oxford reports are smoothed over and stuff like that. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not going there. But that is the sole thing we are paying for in this contract. But here's the biggest important point of all. Gene McVeigh just said he's an employee of Oxford House. I assume he means Oxford House Incorporated in Maryland, the corporation. And if that's true, is he already paid for these services? That's an important question. Is this duplicative? Are we paying him twice? So none of this has been covered. None of this has been addressed. What contract does Gene McVeigh have with Oxford House Incorporated in Maryland? So what we have is tens of thousands of dollars to Gene McVeigh, not to Oxford House, for services that may have already been paid and compensated to Gene McVeigh. Okay, those are serious flaws. If I were sitting in any of these chairs, I would send this contract back to Gene McVeigh and say, can you correct these fundamental flaws? Is this it? Tens of thousands of dollars for a few reports once a week. And if not, then I would turn it down. So please at least do not agree to this and get a real contract if one could be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public comment. Yeah, let me finish with public comment first, please.
My name is Sharon Minty, and when I first heard that you just popped in, excuse me, Supervisor Gitlin, I'm a little nervous. When I first heard that you just popped in at that lady's home, this very vulnerable women's home, just pop in unannounced to scrutinize the place, I was beyond myself upset for those women. They did not need that. I do believe, sir, that you owe them an apology. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
My name is Donna Hopkins, and my husband and I are the people who purchased the property. I'd also like to address Mr. Gitlin and arriving at the house without an appointment and unannounced. And I don't believe that happens. I saw you canvassing the neighborhood, and you didn't enter anyone else's home. And I find it very offensive for someone with some authority to go up to a woman's home and ask to see their home. It's not a home for display. It's a home. It's someone's family home. It's not an institution. It's not a halfway house. The fact that in your canvassing of the neighborhood, I'm not sure that you realize there are several homes in that area or known drug houses. And I know one in particular that you visited with a gentleman out in the yard who didn't even live at that home. So yes, doing diligence, I respect that. I respect that in the utmost, and I wish every person in a political place would do diligence and do their job, but to do it in a respectful manner. I think that the information is all important. The Oxford House is an opportunity, men or women. There's so much focus on this women's house when we've had a men's house here for 4 years. And I do not understand, they go by the exact same rules, why they're not considered a woman magnet. They sit on their porch and have a cigarette, and that is okay. It has been indicated that these women should not be in their front yard. I do not understand that. I do not understand why there is such a stigma because someone has come from where they've come from. I hold them in very high regard that they have been able to get themselves to a point they are not living on the street. They are not prostituting themselves. They are out looking for work. They are trying to become a part of society. They want to be a part of the world. They don't want to live like that anymore. I don't know anyone as a child who grew up and said, I really want to grow up and be a drug addict. I don't know anyone who did that. This is a disease. It's a horrible disease. And it takes not just that person down, it takes their entire family down. I believe that these women and the men in the men's house have come an incredible long way. They have become productive citizens, they are out working, and they are paying taxes. As far as the monies that is paid, from what I see, these people are assisted for 3 months, $400 a month. They are expected to get a job. In that time frame of that $400 being paid, they are expected to be out there looking for work from 9 to 5, not sitting on their behinds, not doing nothing. So as far as I'm concerned, the way this was handled is the problem. And I do believe the women and the men deserve an apology. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
And I work at Open Door. I'm a substance abuse counselor there, and I've been in this field for 20 plus years. I also was a program coordinator at Trillium House Jordan Recovery Center and overseen the clean and sober houses there for about 6 years. And not one time had I known anybody to come over to that facility and disrespect those houses like Mr. Gitlin did with Oxford Women's House. I live on J Street. I live right around the corner. I did not even know the Oxford House for Women was there for the first 7 months. That's how quiet they are. I drive by Loft Street and never noticed any bad behavior, any inappropriate things going on at that house. I also live 2 houses away from one of the drug houses in town. I wished that house would get something done there to save so many lives, because there has been 3 overdoses at that house. And my heart goes out. I'm a recovering addict, and I know from the women in that house what they have went through. They have been through rape, molest, all kinds of behavior that they did not ask for, all kinds of trauma they did not ask for. They deserve a right to have a home, and I am emotional because I am a recovering addict, and I work in this field nonstop every day. And if we don't have funding for these houses, how are these women going to get the first chance of being able to go out and be productive and look for that work if we don't help with that? I have done so much volunteer work. I would volunteer with this house at any time I could, because I have the faith in Oxford House. It is $400 a month, and the other transitional housing are $500 to $550. And if I was to refer anybody anywhere, it would be to the Oxford House for the men and the women, because I have seen the success rate there, and I know these people, and I know what they put into it. So my hat is off to you guys. You know, I wish that we had more Oxford houses in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
Good morning, Supervisors.
Good morning.
My name is Jake Smith. I live in the county. First of all, I want to say that I appreciate Director Snow for meeting with me for over an hour about the Oxford House. I had some questions about it, and Director Snow was very gracious to meet with me and explain to me the program, and I appreciate that. So knowing what I know about the program, like many others, I appreciate what the program does, and I appreciate the fact that the program is self-supporting. I like all those elements of the program, and I wish all the residents in the program well on their road to recovery. That being said, my issue and my main area of concern is the fact that we're taking a single-family home in a residential neighborhood, zone R1, and we're talking about creating a high-density environment. We're talking about, we heard residents, we heard visitors, and we heard guests. So we could have as many as 10 to 20 residents in this house, in this 4-bedroom house that we're talking about today. Several impacts to this. We could have impacts to off-street parking with all the cars they could have. There could be impacts to utilities. There's a transient nature of residents, visitors coming and going from the house. That's going to happen. And ultimately, these kind of things, I feel, regardless of the program, could affect property values in that neighborhood. And, you know, you think about what could happen if we had 4, 5, 6 houses on this one street. That could have significant impacts to a neighborhood. So I've heard about I know there's federal law, there's state law. I appreciate that. But I do think it would be prudent for the county to have some kind of public hearing before these types of decisions or changes are made. I think it's owed to the residents. I think it's owed to the citizens of the county to at least have an opportunity to come and learn more about the program, ask questions, and et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Public comment?
Hi, I'm Patricia Black. I live in District 1. I often don't feel very well represented there, but that's where I live and I'm glad to live there. I'm also a lay leader at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, which happens to be very much in the neighborhood. And I've been asked by several members of the church to express our support for Oxford House. We believe in loving our neighbors as ourselves. We believe that people's lives can be transformed. And we agree with what Supervisor Howard said about the children. We want all children and all adults to have the chance to succeed in having rich, full lives. There's been an excellent series of articles in the Triplicate which show that Oxford House provides the structure and supportive environment needed to change the lives of people who struggle with addiction. Oxford houses make good neighbors. I live in this community. I've lived in this community for 30 years. No one has a public hearing when they start a meth manufacturing house. No one has a public hearing when they have a drug house, which, as Tony says, is right there in that neighborhood. No, they wouldn't have a public hearing when there's a place where people can get together and turn their lives around. I know people who live on the streets, people who would give anything for a chance to move into a room and get that $400 a month taxpayer money in order to get their lives turned around. Do you know how much money we'd save on not putting those people in jail? So, sorry, I didn't mean to get excited about this, but I am excited about that. I'm glad we've had this opportunity to see the really good work that's happening in our community. I believe that we as a community should support these women in their recovery, and I urge you to approve this funding today. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. There were some questions in addition for Director Snow. Director Snow, can you please approach the dais? I believe Supervisor Cowan had some additional follow-up questions. And I don't know if you want to address anything that was mentioned during the public comment.
Happy to. My question is, we talked about the contract. It's my understanding it's with Oxford House Sequoia and Gina's a signer, just like we have contracts with Countering and Chris is a signer.
It says on the signatory page, Oxford House Sequoia.
Okay. And then it's my understanding it's a 7-bedroom house. It keeps being called a 4. Isn't that correct, ladies? And also there's no cars there, correct? Okay. Come to my house. I've got teenagers. I've got about 5 cars. And we only sit on my deck out front. I never sit in my backyard. And men don't come. We just hang out there. And I also live in a very highly, what was the word you used, Jake? Transient neighborhood. I live on Pebble Beach Drive. Do you have any idea how many vacation rentals I have just in my block, or like half a mile? It's a constant turnover. Now that's a transient neighborhood. I don't think where the house is transient at all. But if you could talk further about the contract.
Sure. And Thank you to Mr. Smith. I was happy to spend time with him and go over his concerns. I've spent numerous hours speaking to individuals over the phone, through email, answering anybody's questions to the best of my ability, and I'm always happy to do that. I happen to think that this is really straightforward. In attachment A and B, the service that we're paying for is housing. They're providing a residence, and that's why we're working with them. So, you know, the sentence that says contractor agrees to provide certain female clients as determined by Del Norte County AOD to be in need of clean and sober residence services. Such residence services will be provided. That's what we're paying for. It's $400 a month rent. There's a $150 a month move-in fee. The reports, more or less, are communication between the two of us. You know, who's living there? Are they confirming it's the individuals we referred? That's who we're paying for. So that just clarifies that we are paying for the individuals we want to, and they're not having us pay for everybody that gets referred from everywhere else. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I appreciate that. I was trying to find out where Mr. Nunn was getting his information because my contract says with Oxford House Sequoia. And then he did take out of context, he didn't finish the sentence where he said providing clients, so female clients or whatever it said. And then I think he was got confused with the kind of the liaison, which Mr. McVeigh is, and that's the contact information. So I think it was just a little confusion there. So I appreciate you bringing that all out.
Very good. Thank you, Director Snell. All right, we're going to move directly into item 18, which is approve and authorize the chair to sign an agreement with Oxford House Sequoia to provide clean and sober residential services from July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2018, not to exceed $26,000 as requested by the Director of Health and Human Services. Director Snow, I don't know if you need to elaborate on this further. I think this is played out enough, but I believe we all understand what we're voting on right now.
I'll make a motion to approve item number 18.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Public comment. Please.
Heather Snow just said that it's to pay for their rent. This is supposed to be self-funded organization. So please explain to me how $26,000 is self-funded organization.
Public comment.
I'm looking at the contract. It says the contractor is an individual. Is it your understanding that I don't know if it's a corporation, organization, or what, Oxford House Sequoia can be described legally as an individual? I know I can't ask questions.
County Council.
Yes, a corporation or anything legally can be described as an individual. That is true,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Public comment. I'll go ahead and bring it back to the board at this time. We have a motion on the table and a second. Kylie, can you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
After some considerable thought, I am voting yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. Thank you, and I'd like to personally apologize to the ladies. I had a chance to visit with you and talk about what you've gone through in your lives, and I know it's tough. It's very tough to have your lives put out there and open in public, and I'm not necessarily sure it had to happen that way. Matter of fact, I'm quite sure it didn't happen to happen that way. I'm sorry your lives were violated. I'm sorry somebody from this board utilized their authority to come into your home and question your program when they could have approved or approached this through another means. Stories that you conveyed to me since that incident occurred, both with the reports that you filed at the Sheriff's Department and the report you have now filed with our board, I'm sure the board will look to seek and take action on in the future, but we won't address it here today. But nobody deserves to have their life put out there in the public. And I know you guys have gotten a lot of comments from people that would have otherwise not even known you were there. And we're very sorry about that as a board. I wish we could have changed how the outcome of this was delivered, but to that extent, I am glad this community knows that there's programs like yours and the Oxford House available, so we don't have to have the homeless problems here on the street, and you guys could help take action in your lives to change your own outcomes. And we appreciate your time and attendance here today. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to our next timed agenda item, and that is our 10:35 timed item, review the current status and discuss and take action on continue borrow Boys Ranch operations or to provide direction to staff to proceed with steps to cease operations as juvenile detention facility borrow Boys Ranch as requested by the Chief Probation Officer and County Administrative Officer. Good morning, Mr. Raymond. How are you today?
I'm doing all right.
Welcome. If you don't mind, I'm going to give the room a few seconds to clear. Thank you. Please proceed.
So my report will be somewhat brief. I filed this as the board item from last week, so you've had a chance to review it and look at it. I'll just go over this very briefly and be available to answer questions, that sort of thing. Basically, actions since the last board meeting on May 9th, the board gave directive to continue operating, seek out other referrals, and see what we could do to get to a population of 15 by this date. Ranch staff has continued to do so, continue to offer those programs and run the ranch in the manner that they always have, and service the boys that we do have in custody. One amendment to the report that I provided to you, we currently have 3 boys in custody. One failed program this past week and was sent home. So we currently have 2 from Napa County and 1 from El Dorado County in custody. Deputy Director Burrow, as I stated, has maintained his contact with contracting counties, been available for new referrals. He's vetted some submissions over the last 3 months. Some we've accepted, some were not appropriate for the ranch. In addition to his efforts to maintain those contacts and reach out to counties that he was already connected with, staff worked to create a brochure that we could use in marketing the ranch as a leave-behind item or as a mailer to send out to give further information in detail about the ranch and the programs that we run there. In mid-June, I contacted, along with Deputy Director Burrow, included in the email, approximately 15 counties in the state. These were counties that have the highest in-custody populations in the state. We were looking to target the top 20. We had already contacted 5 of those previously and had conversations with those. So an email was sent out, essentially a soft handoff to Director Burrow, following up on solicitation I made in March at the Chiefs meeting, essentially asking for any referrals. We're here, we offer these programs. Here's a brief overview. If you have questions, please follow up with Deputy Director Burrow. We got a couple responses from several chiefs, but nothing that's materialized at this point. And the last point to cover is the tribal partnership that was extended by the Yurok tribe and the Tribal Coalition. I had discussions following the May meeting with Judge Abernathy and the consultant for the tribe, Jenny Walter, throughout the week of the 4th week of May. We spoke on the phone, we exchanged emails, we discussed quite a bit. of the different factors involved. At the end of the day, what it seemed to boil down to is the tribe was looking to, as far as population goes, they were looking to target a low-risk population of youth. I had several concerns with that I shared with them. The ranch typically does not house low-risk youth. Counties across the state don't typically incarcerate low-risk youth. We look to offer programs, provide alternative sources other than in custody commitments to deal with those youth. And so in having the tribe discuss these kids that they were looking at, I had some major concerns with rebranding the ranch, as they put it, to target those youth. That would, in my view, that would put us in a box as far as being able to reach out to other counties across the state and actually have commitments from other counties when those youth aren't in custody on a regular basis. So although it might result in a few referrals from the tribes, we would limit ourselves in the referrals we would get from other probation offices, other courts across the state. So I shared those concerns with them. My other major concern was funding. In discussing this with Judge Abenanti and Ms. Walter, they indicated that they did not at that time have grant funding that they had identified as being able to utilize for this. They were hoping to be able to secure grant funding that would pay for 2 beds at the ranch. That also was of concern to me. The Yurok tribe is the largest, in my understanding, the largest and most active of the tribes in this coalition that they put together. And to have only 2 possibilities, again, they didn't have funding identified at that time, was very concerning to me. I also have concerns about grant funding being utilized to pay for the day-to-day costs. Oftentimes we can bring grant funding into institutions to pay for programs, part of staff time, things like that, but the bulk of our expenses at the ranch or any institution is our payroll, to pay people to be there to oversee those youth. So I shared that concern with them as well. So throughout the conversation over that week in May, Judge Abenanti eventually got to the point she submitted a letter to the board, which you've received, essentially saying, although our goals are the same, pardon me, although our goals are the same in reaching our youth, intervening in their lives, the lives of at-risk youth, and providing them opportunities, the ranch didn't seem to be the venue to do that. And so essentially at that point, they decided to look for other opportunities, is my understanding. So that's what I have as far as my report goes. Again, I'm available to answer questions. If anything was unclear, please ask me to clarify.
Thank you. Supervisor Henderson.
These low-risk youth that you're talking about,
Yes.
from the tribe, would those be custodial, or you're talking that they would not be custodial?
They would.
Was that the issue? Or?
They would have to be custodial. They can't be placed in the ranch unless there's a couple criteria. One would be that they are a 602 court ward. So any youth placed in custody in the state of California has to be adjudged by a juvenile court judge, a ward of the court. So that's the first criteria. After that, the court has to determine that they're going to place them in a custodial commitment. So in talking it over, there actually are avenues where we could partner with the tribal court where they could be able to, based on the research of county council, make custodial placements, and we would be able to honor that. That would have to be in tandem again with the juvenile court, county juvenile court, adjudging that youth a 602 court ward, because the tribal court doesn't have authority to do that. But a couple pieces would have to be put in place. That wasn't necessarily an obstacle. The major obstacle is, what youth are we talking about? I had contact, my juvenile unit had contact from the tribal wellness court to discuss 2 youth in particular. One at the time was not on probation, although at risk, most definitely. He's not a 602, or was not at the time a 602 court ward, was not under my jurisdiction at all. And so that first criteria would be challenging in that case. The second youth they talked to us about was on probation in 602 Court Ward. However, he was actually doing really well. Again, still at risk, still struggles within the family unit, still struggles with substance abuse. Not to say he doesn't have a long road ahead of him, but for the last 6 months he'd been doing well, attending school. We'd seen some significant positive change. So for me as Chief Probation Officer with a youth under my custody, or under my care and authority, I would have significant reservations on agreeing that that youth should be taken out of the environment he's in and placed in a custody environment. So those are the two concrete examples I've got.
On the funding piece, you mentioned grant funding. There was absolutely no discussion then specific to a general fund source, whether it was UROC, whether it was Karuk, or whether it was Hoopa tribes, on bringing that type of operating capital into the program?
I didn't have any discussions with the judge or staff about general funding from the tribes.
Just grant funding was the only thing mentioned?
My understanding from discussions they had when they visited the ranch and discussions they had with Deputy Director Burrow, as well as the discussions they had with me, were that they were specifically looking at grant funding.
And what was the source of grant funding, do you recall?
They didn't have a source at that time,
okay,
as far as I was aware.
Supervisor Galen.
Lonnie, I want to address your reservations. Do you see the tribe as a viable option in keeping Bar O open in a capacity in which you can look at your reservations and see if there is common ground? Do you see that as a possibility? Because they are an option, and they may not have the funding at this exact moment, but a reevaluation of and a closer look at these reservations that you have stated publicly here might open that door for that discussion. So would you be willing to meet with the tribe again and look at the viability of using the Yurok tribe and in this way, and that would meet with your mission with 602 kids and your mission to provide the kind of services necessary to, number one, keep the camp operating, long history, and number two, helping children, helping these kids. Do you see that there's an opportunity to reevaluate there?
Well, again, my concerns come back to what's the population and where does the money come from. Currently, we don't have the population. Counties across the state have determined that they don't have the youth that they believe are appropriate to refer to us for either the fact that they don't have appropriate youth or they don't have funds to send them. So currently, we're at a population of 3. The tribe is talking about a level of criminality in youth that would be typically less than the youth that we currently have in custody, less than the youth that is typically placed in custody by courts, especially for long-term custodial commitments. And when you're talking about Bar O, you're talking about a 12-month custody commit. These are not kids that are out committing misdemeanors. You don't have that kind of custody time with a misdemeanor. So would I be willing to come to the table? Absolutely. And that was part of the discussion between Judge Avenanti and myself, is we believe we have a common goal because we care about our kids and we want to see the best outcomes for them. The question comes back to, is Bar O the appropriate vehicle to address those kids that we're talking about? Generally speaking, no. Those are my kids. You know, those are kids that are already under my authority and the juvenile court's authority. So if those were the kids that were appropriate for Bar O, they'd already be sent there, our kids.
Lonnie, I say this because in a short period of time, those three kids you have now are going to be gone, and they're not going to be replaced. So isn't this an opportunity to reevaluate the mission and perhaps look for some flexibility in looking at what appears to be a viable option with the tribe? I'm just asking you, would you keep that open mind?
I would. My purview is a custodial institution. Barrow, as it stands now, is a kid jail. That's what it is by statute. So the discussion is, can it continue to operate as a custodial institution, or do we look at other alternatives to utilize the facility? That decision has to be made first before we can either continue to operate as a custodial institution and try and find youth that someone would put in custody, or do we look at other alternatives? If we stay on the custodial side, I'm in the game. I'll be at the table. That's why I'm here. But again, with the population that we're talking about and the possible funding sources to pay for that, I don't see the viability even over the next year, much less the next 10, 15, or 20 years for Barrow.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, there's a potential that the tribe can bring us custodial, just not at the level that you want them to be at. Is that correct?
We could bring 2 kids, and we would be at 5. So it's not necessarily a level that I want to be at. Currently, I'm operating in deficit.
No, I understand.
So.
Where do you get 2 from? Because I was under the impression that the conversation was stopped because you couldn't come to the agreement of how they would be treated or how it would be run. And I'm hearing you saying that they're at a higher level is what you've been running at, and the tribes, and it's not just Yurok, it's a group of tribes coming together, would be at a different level. They'd still be custodial, is that correct? Just at a different level.
Well,
so I'm trying to understand, why aren't we having that conversation? If it adjusts down, I can't imagine that being a bad thing.
Well, the conversation comes back to, if we're talking about low-risk kids, I'm not going to buy in on putting kids in custody that are low risk when I can provide them services and opportunities out of custody. My mandate and the philosophical underpinnings of juvenile justice is to provide services and correct behavior in youth at the lowest level of custody possible. You're looking at the least restrictive environment. And the ranch is a restrictive environment. It's a custodial institution. So if I can provide those services in a less restrictive environment, that is the goal. So again, the 2 concrete examples I can give you, the 2 youth that they were looking at as possible youth to place in Barrow, one wasn't even under my jurisdiction. He wasn't a 602 court ward. So the juvenile court has to make that determination first. Even if the tribal court wanted to, they could make a custodial order, but I can't honor that unless that youth is a 602 court ward. So that's where the 2 courts, the juvenile court and the tribal court, have to work in tandem to some degree.
I was under my impression that they were willing to do that.
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't know that Judge Follett, the juvenile court judge, nor Judge Amanati had any issues with that. But what we were talking about was a youth that had not been adjudged a 602 court ward yet. So I don't have anywhere to go with that until I have a 602 order from the juvenile court judge.
Again, I think that it's just, I don't know how to say this. The conversation seemed to have stopped, and I'm trying to understand why. If you haven't gone through the whole conversation and come up with a game plan with them, with Judge Abby, how do you know how many they can, you know what I mean? All the kids aren't out there yet, or I was under the impression there would be more than 2.
As was I.
Yes, they were talking about grants, but there was other funding as well, but you said you didn't have that conversation. So what I'm hearing is that the conversation was stopped short. Would you be willing to and open to expand that conversation to make sure that there is no, you know, that if there is a possibility, that we know it? Does
Yes,
that make sense?
yes,
Okay,
I
so
would be
yes.
willing to have the conversation. I was never under the impression that the conversation was stopped short. Again, the information that was relayed to me from Judge Amanati and Jenny Walters was their goal was to look for funding for 2 placements.
2, and only 2.
Yes.
The coalition, I guess, was built around multiple tribes participating in the program. Did you get a sense that there was more youth that would come into the program under this custodial type arrangement from?
I know that, yes, that was the goal, and that was the intended and stated goal from the beginning.
Right.
I didn't get any information from Judge Abby that she had been in contact or had information from the other tribes, that they had youth they were looking at, or what their stage in this process was.
Do you know if Barrow had any of those conversations?
I don't know.
Okay.
Not
thank
that
you.
I'm aware.
Supervisor Berkowitz.
3 months ago, you had 5 kids in this facility. You created a brochure. I went up and visited with Director Burrow, who was going to have an aggressive marketing program. Today, we have 3. 6 months from now, assuming the same marketing program, and if we were to keep that open, keep in mind the board basically gave you a goal of having 16 by today. So 6 months from now, maintaining everything the same, what would you expect that we might have as far as the number of kids?
Frankly, I have no idea.
Okay.
Supervisor Berkowitz.
So that's an honest answer. Okay.
Additional comments from the board? Very good. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for public comment this time.
Sharon Minty. And, you know, we started coming to these board meetings because we would like to see what's happening in our community and form some opinion. And I certainly was careful to tell everyone I knew that, believe me, I would not be getting up and saying a word. Well, I don't know a lot about the Barrow thing, but I know a little bit. And I do hear now that there's some talk perhaps about working together with the tribes for the betterment of all the children. And personally, I don't know exactly, like to say, how all the details work there, but it'd sure be nice to get the children into, you know, out of the environment that they're in that isn't maybe working for them, and into an environment like, such as at Bar O, where they can learn skills, learn to honor themselves and others, so that they don't become those high-level offenders that would now be, you'd have to be a high-level offender to be at Bar O. Let's get those children and nurture them and help them out and help them be strong before they're a high-level offender. So if we can somehow work it out with Bar O to where we can indeed fill it up with children that haven't already gotten well over their heads, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment? Good morning.
Hi, I'm Kent Burrow, Gasky, California. So this is a difficult day. I'm going to go at this from a couple of different perspectives. One, the personal one. Barrow is a pretty therapeutic environment, board, and walked on there, a much younger man, longer hair. Some people accuse me of having a mullet. But I can tell you that Barrow gave me a sense of self. I've told my staff over the years that you cannot come to work for this facility without dealing with your own interpersonal baggage. Otherwise, you're not going to be effective. If you don't have your own house in order, you're not going to be able to help the young men in our charge with their house. I had the pleasure of working with incredible leadership through the form of Thomas Greener, Alan Smith, and support staff who mentored me to eventually get me to this position at the ranch. So I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for my staff. I'm thankful that I in some way was able to pass on some of the knowledge and the mentoring and bring up the staff of the quality that we currently do have. It is an incredible facility. And as a manager, I can tell you that it's really difficult to feel like you have nowhere else to go. I want my numbers to be grand and plentiful, but it's just not happening. I look at this board and I know that you all said, hey, let's go 3 more months. Thank you, Supervisor Berkowitz, for throwing that out there, because it was very clear that everybody sat up here and voted unanimously to support the ranch, to give it that extra time. Efforts were made, more time was needed, but the reality is we stand at 3. I'm just going to say that I'm not sure which way this is going to go. I hear a lot of different kinds of messages, but for the record, Barrow Boys Ranch is a custodial institution, and by definition, it could be jail. I never envisioned Barrow as jail. I envisioned it as a therapeutic environment where we can make differences in young men's lives in hopes that their lives will go on to be something better than what they had brought to the table when they first arrived at Barrow. So regardless of what happens here today, I just want to extend a thank you to everybody up here for supporting this for the many years that you have. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Paul Dillard. I'm the chairman of the Juvenile Justice, as you know. I didn't come here to fight. I've been a strong advocate for Barrow. You know where my position is. It's the best thing, really. I know what your dilemma is, money. We, the taxpayers, worry about money. We hold you accountable to that, so I know. We started this process in January with the 2x2s. At that time, money was the only thing we talked about. In March, we come and we presented what we thought was the problem that started the closure. Whether you agree with that or not, doesn't matter. The commission is an advisory body that talks to people, watches and does things, and they present it. We ask for help. We ask you in April for help. We ask you, contact the legislator, try to help us find money, try to do everything. You put it back to us, basically. Whether my interpretation was wrong, I apologize, but it kind of felt like, go find the money. I went on my own dime to Sacramento. I talked to a person I know all of you know, Matthew Cates. He used to be the agency secretary for corrections at the governor cabinet level. He asked me 3 questions. He's a bright man. Because of my background, I had worked with him before. He said, what is the board doing? I said, well, they told us to go find it. He says, who's contacting the legislature? I said, we don't have that contact. We have to rely on them. We asked them to write a letter to the legislature. He said, well, what's the judge doing? And I said, judge's position is Barrow belongs to the board in the county, and he understands their financial things, and he's waiting for them to make a decision. This is one of the 10-minute managers, basically. He said, if the board doesn't support you and not advocating for you, and the judge isn't doing anything, and you haven't got the legislature, you're done. And our conversation was over. So we come back, and lo and behold, we get a gift. We didn't solicit the tribes. They contacted us. And we brought that to the board in May. We had a whole different turnaround, and I told you then, I really appreciate you giving them the time to look. I thought Lonnie's presentation at that time was stellar, and I said, we want to climb on board to support him, if that's where he wants to be. But check the date of your letter, because I don't know when it changed. Check the date of the letter from Judge Abbey. Because it wasn't very long into it. In fact, I had stepped away from it, wasn't even asking questions. And I called Kent, and I said, what's going on? I haven't heard anything. And he says, he hadn't heard anything either. And so I went down there. And she told me, we can't do it. I said, well, why can't you do it? She said, I can make it happen. Now, you got to know, and please allow me, you have to understand Judge Abby. Judge Abby is nationally known for her work. Just Google her. She was in San Francisco in a court, sat on the bench there for about 20 years roughly, and I presented to you before, Log Cabin Ranch. I told you what the funding they get and what they do, and you guys and I would have done it too. Tongue in cheek, that's San Francisco, they get all the money. But I'm telling you, she can get this money. I talked to her and she said, this is a great time because this is our grant writing time. They can get, there's 8 entities, that presentation they give you, that paperwork was 8 tribal entities that wanted to get involved in this. The Log Cabin Ranch is a partnership of San Francisco Probation, the school district of San Francisco, and the courts to make this happen. That's why they get all this money. Juvenile justice funds are out there. Abby's got the contacts. She told me, I can raise the funds. She says, I want to make this just like Log Cabin Ranch. But I can't do it overnight. She said, to get to that level, it would probably be about 6 years. I just want to get it to where you can do it now and survive. And we will build on it. I questioned her about, did you, because I kept hearing they're going to commingle people on probation and not on probation. She said no. She wanted no partnership in it if the probation department didn't run it. She said the probation department has to run it. We will not take it over. And we will not take it over with just Native Americans because society isn't made up that way because we need to blend people. The only thing they requested was AOD, was alcohol and drug counseling, and Native American component. We've had SWAT lodges up there. We don't have alcohol and drug because we don't have people trained to do it, but the tribe does. Right here at the Indian Health at Smith River, they're willing to go up there and teach that component. This is a win-win and can happen. Where the problem is there's a philosophical difference. They're not wanting to run a strict custody joint. All they know that you got to have custody. It is a custody joint by law. But you have to have rehabilitative services and you must buy into that. That is the national trend now, is the rehabilitative services. We're getting away from fences and bars and dorms. That's why they're closing stuff down. But there's I said before, there's always the room for that. Log Cabin Ranch is a national acclaimed thing. We could have that, could be our showcase here. As far as the grants and the money, she told me that's really not an issue. This lady picks up the phone and calls Washington, D.C. with her contacts. And she knows people all over the state of California that are involved in social work and this type of thing. I don't want to take any more time other than that, I'm glad to see you're looking.
Thank you.
I would ask that, and I think Mr. Raymond probably I liked his presentation, but I think it's still there. Because she told me it's still there. She could still do it. You did a 2x2 when we started this. I think it's a board's decision. We need 2 people here to sit down with her, sit down with Judge Follett. Mr. Raymond absolutely has to be there because it's going to be his program. But we need to go forward now and explore whether this guy, and if that's just another 30 days, I don't know. And I appreciate your comments, Mr. Gillen, because you've done a turn on me, and that's supportive. If we can't do it, I'll be the first throw in the towel. I mean, white flag and all. But we need to do this for kids. We said we don't put our kids up there. We do, because we can send Klamath. That's our kids. All Northern California is kids. What happens to kids when they don't get a proper program is right now we got kids in this community surfing, couch surfing. When they get out of 18 and they get out, they go to the homeless. We've talked, you guys talked all about the homeless. I mean, you've looked at it, you've explored and do that. We don't want to contribute to the homeless. We don't want to contribute to the jails and the prisons. I don't know about lightweight, whether the lightweight, as long as they're can be convicted by the court, or convinced by the court to send up there, that's good. That'll fit into the residents up there because they want lightweight. But what San Francisco does is they hooked it to truancy too. Now, if we can take the school district and hook this thing somehow, I talked to the judge, he wasn't really warm and fuzzy with that. I think that would have to be explored a little more down in San Francisco. I'm not saying that's true, but if we can hook that, it could be a positive too. I think we need, as Mr. Gitlin said, reassess what we're doing it. But under no circumstances should it be taken out of probation's role. But probation needs to make that change for this rehabilitated. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your work.
Public comment. Please come forward.
It's now good afternoon. I'm Norma Williams, Chapter President of the Delaware County Employees Association, SEIU 10-1. This is difficult for me because I'm speaking obviously on behalf of the gallant members that we have up at Barrow Ranch. They are peace officers for our contract as well as the state of California, and that is something that they should be recognized for and applauded for the hard work and dedication that they have done throughout the years that they've been up at the ranch. If there's a way that, if it's possible to save the ranch, if it's possible to reopen discussions with the tribes, we are definitely more in support of that. I was under the impression several months ago when a representative of the council was here that they almost guaranteed with some time and through some funding and further discussion that they could almost guarantee 2 children, 2 youth per tribe. That's what I remember hearing, and I wrote that down in my notes several months ago when this all came up. If there's a way to do that, if there's a way to bring 2 of you in on the discussion, which I definitely would advocate for, then that's something that we would definitely want to see happen as well. But regardless of whatever you decide, the union will definitely support your decision. We will work with the county and with the department in any way in order to assist the members in whatever you decide. But keeping in mind, though, that we will be advocating for and negotiating for their best interest regardless of the contract. Because again, I'm looking at their service, I'm looking at the fact that they are peace officers, and I'm looking at the fact that they deserve it. Thank you.
Yeah, Don Gillespie, a retired teacher for Delaware County Unified School District. And I was very fortunate to have spent the last 17 years of my career at Barrow Boys Ranch. And I say fortunate because I was able to look numerous boys in the eye on their graduation day and see the pride in their own success that they may not have had without Barrow Boys Ranch and its staff being there. It's an amazing program, and I know that you're aware of that as a board. I just want to say that Barrow Boys Ranch has been a feather in our cap, and Delaware County has supported this school and this reform center for well over 60 years. And I know there's been difficult times in the past where Al Smith had to come before you and speak to fund the program. And it's a tough situation right now with the numbers not being there, but whatever we can do to keep this fine program going, I would certainly applaud, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board.
Peter Craig, and I'm a resident of the county, also a teacher at Barrow Boys Ranch.
didn't expect to speak today, but I wanted to acknowledge, 3 months ago I stood in front of you and said I was optimistic. And I didn't come to this meeting with as much optimism knowing our population was at 3. But to hear Mr. Dillard and to reflect on you representing our community by extending by 90 days a chance to make things happen, and with Mr. Raymond's efforts, if we're not there, but I hear Mr. Dillard and his conversations with Judge Abbey might provide a glimmer of optimism. However this might go, I would second his suggestion, and again, others have spoken about the 2x2. For you to be involved, to steward the conversation to an option that would see Borrow there in the years ahead. And I know we're talking custodial at this point, and I think others have spoken to the benefits of Borrow and the therapy and the staff and the expertise that has come together as a team, working with Del Norders. If it were to be custodial, all the better. If not, catch them earlier, as Sharon Minty spoke about. And that conversation may need to happen in the future, but I think that's part of that conversation. If you have it in the future as a 2x2 with Judge Abbey or other tribal groups, I would encourage that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Public comment? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. All right. Supervisor Berkowitz.
First of all, as a former 12-year school board member, I had a chance to work with talented people up there. Peter Craig, Don Gillespie, probably the finest teachers that you could have. I remember participating in graduation ceremonies where nobody expected Borrow boys to graduate and get a diploma. But because of these two superior teachers, they made it happen. And I would be remiss if I did not commend these two publicly. And if I have to vote to delete Borrow from this county, it will be the saddest day of my career, even though I may have to do that.
Supervisor Cowan.
You know, I'm with Bob as far as being the saddest day. It's hard coming onto a board 6 months ago, I guess it's been a little bit longer, and walk into this situation. And I just keep hearing Judge Abbey's name keep coming up today. We've been, it's come up a few times, and I just think we really need to make sure, whether that's another week or two, to have that one-on-one and hear directly from her, because we're hearing her words from other people, and I don't feel comfortable with that. I think it's important to do so.
Supervisor Gitlin.
No one here doubts the work that has been completed by those dedicated to helping kids. Kent, you and I have talked about this for a long time. I've substituted up there. I'm a retired juvenile court school teacher. But this county is faced with a deficit that we cannot ignore. And however we can increase the POP to ameliorate the costs associated with keeping this wonderful program open remains the dilemma. And I don't know how to do this, how we can wave this magic wand, but this is not just a local problem to Borrow. This is going on in juvenile probation camps across the state. I come from Los Angeles County. I was a teacher for the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and that when I retired, there were 18 probation camps. There are now 9. 9 are left, because they don't have the kids necessary to put in there. The state has a new model on how it deals with juvenile corrections. So a lot of this is out of our hands. This is just not something that we can wave a magic wand on and get that number up to a respectable number. So I have to look at my pocketbook and say, can we afford to do this? Not whether it's a great program or not. It is a great program. So that is what's going to move me when I move to make a hard vote on whether we can keep this thing open. I want to vet all opportunities, including the opportunity to work with the tribe. Judge Abby, I'm absolutely interested in hearing her words that we can wave this magic wand over it and get the necessary funding to keep it open. But absence of that, we have to look at the economics because it will affect the rest of Del Norte County in its budget and its ability to function. So, thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Hemmingson.
Yeah, you know, I'd certainly like to thank all the volunteers on the Juvenile Justice Commission. They do an outstanding job, and all the employees out at Barrow Ranch. Nobody is questioning the program. We've been through this, and all the discussion that we're having today is basically the same discussion that we had 3 months ago. And we can kick this can down the road and down the road, but it's at the expense of Del Norte County. It's not at the expense of the counties that we have kids up there in Barrow. And you know, that's a difficult decision to make, that Del Norte County residents pay the extra fees that are necessary to house children from other counties. Not that we don't have a responsibility to all kids. I think we do have some, but those counties themselves have some responsibility too, and they don't seem to be kicking in any extra. It's difficult, and we can have this discussion about Judge Abbey and how many kids. Lonnie says there's 2 kids. Well, 2 kids isn't gonna get it done, and you know, and then there's a ratio there that the tribes want to deal with also. So I think it'd be very difficult to get to a point to where we can expect the tribes to fund the entire Barrow Ranch. I think it's a difficult situation, and it's not going to be a good one.
We've discussed this quite a bit, and it was important to have this discussion for the sake of a program that was in our community that served children from all over the state and was extremely successful by all accounts and all reports over the last 6 months at serving those needs. We have accomplished teaching staff that served at Barrow, as recognized by Supervisor Berkowitz. We have accomplished staff that served the needs of children to help them get ahead in life. And with that basic goal and premise, there's no better cause in trying to find a way to keep a facility open. But I've got to reflect back on conversations that we've had over the last couple months about the deficit that we are running right now. And there's nothing more than I would like to see than having the room in our general fund budget to keep our facility open. But there is no room in our general fund budget without taking cuts in other public safety arenas, and that's difficult because everybody here that has come out to voice their support for Barrow Boys Ranch has done it from their hearts and done it from facts that have suggested that this program, not like other programs, but this specific program has served boys throughout the state of California extremely well. And I'm very sorry it has gotten to this point, because you guys have done an incredible job with the youth in the state of California. And I'm not sure what direction we'll move forward with here today. I haven't seen an option put forward on the table. But I do know when the board made a decision 3 months ago to give that extra bit of time, even knowing that we put ourselves into further debt in the general fund, but to give that extra time to go out and seek those options, that we gave that time. And so I agree with the words I've heard today. It's a very sad day for all of us that have watched a program here in this community grow up. And unlike Supervisor Hemmingson, I don't want to see this can kick down the road any further. We just can't afford the hit, and there's got to be other options. So I'd like to hear some direction to staff on how to proceed. I'm not entirely sure if somebody is willing to craft a motion at this time or look towards that direction, but we do need some movement on this. Supervisor Gitlin.
Just a point of order. I don't want to countermand Supervisor Berkowitz's past motion, but isn't this already in effect in the deadline date is tomorrow, in fact? So we already have a motion passed, which would have to be overturned, I guess, with a new motion, or is it even necessary? So we have our August the 9th as the date of prospective closure, and then the process thereon begins.
That was this meeting to speak to that point, Supervisor. It was this meeting that we'd make a decision on whether or not closure would occur and if they would reach, as Supervisor Berkowitz said, 16.
And short of that threshold, that these then requires a second motion to actually begin the process. Is that my understanding, Mr. Chairman?
Council?
I'm looking back in the May meeting to see what exactly that motion said, so I'm looking.
While council is taking a look at this, we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute recess, and we'll be back. you. County Council, can you please let us know what you determined?
Yeah, so the board, the action on May 9th was that the board approved directing staff to work with the Tribal Coalition for tribal custodial placements immediately to fill a minimum of 16 beds at Barrow Ranch and provide updates at every board meeting as feasible prior to the board making its final decision on August 8th, 2017. And it looks like that was a motion by Supervisor Berkowitz, but there's nothing that's pending right now.
Correct. Okay, thank you very much. CEO?
So the previous direction was to delay it to this point to work on those. Today is not a formal action of the board. It would be direction to go in one way or the other, whether it's to continue it or to close. And then there would be other actions required at future board meetings so that we comply with all of our requirements and have time to meet with employees and such.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification, both of you. Supervisor Berkowitz?
I guess one of the things that I'm concerned about is more than just Barrow. 3 months ago, we made a commitment. This board made a commitment. And the commitment was that if the facility was to be at 16, we would have a further commitment to keep it open. If we were to go back on our word today, as a board, no one could ever trust this board again to keep its word. So, reluctantly, I move that we provide direction to the staff to proceed with steps to cease operations as a juvenile detention facility, basically Barrow.
Point of order.
Supervisor?
I'm just hearing the CAO say we do not need motion action. It's direction by consensus. That's what I thought I heard you say, Jay, to give the CAO the direction to move in a certain direction. And if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, it's not a motion, but it's in fact a chairman-directed consensus. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it would be a coordinated consensus from the Board of Supervisors to give us direction. It would come back on the next board, at the next board meeting or the board meeting after that, as we follow through with steps, legal steps, and or agreed upon steps through the MOU if the decision is to cease operations.
That could come in the form of consensus, or can it come in form of a motion also?
Either one.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion, a second on the table. Any other motions? Okay, seeing none. Kylie, could you please poll the vote?
Supervisor Gitlin?
With great reluctance, I support the motion.
Supervisor Cowan?
I still think that, I just feel that the whole Judge Abby, the whole tribe situation has not been thoroughly vetted, and I support, I know I have to be fiscally responsible to the Del Norte County, and I respect that, and I support this motion and that, but I would hope that somebody in the next week or two would reach out to Judge Abby and hear her words. So, you know, as we're going through this process, we know, I don't know if there is any viability to that as well. So, yes on the motion.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. Staff?
With that direction, I will proceed along with the Chief Probation Officer, and we will be going through the steps of the cessation plan that was previously submitted to the board. It's in this agenda. And we'll report back to the board as soon as we can with regard to any formal actions the board needs to take.
Thank you, and thank you to those at Barrow for continuing to move this down and trying to provide this board every option necessary. Thanks to those at the Juvenile Justice Commission for sticking with us and looking out for the youth of this state. I know this was a tough decision for the board. Please help us take those next steps. Thank you. We're going to move to item number 27, which is to authorize the temporary closure of Patrick's Creek Road at milepost 8.4 from August 15th through August 31st, 2017 to replace 2 culverts as requested by Community Development Director. Good afternoon, Ms. Constable.
Good afternoon. My recommendations pretty much cover the entire subject in this case. So we have a RAC-funded project, Title II, Secure Rural Schools and
Correct.
Community Self-Determination Act project that was authorized through our Del Norte RAC to replace a culvert on Patrick Creek Road at roughly milepost 8.41. So we are requesting permission to be able to close the road for a two-week period beginning on August 15th in order to get in there and get it replaced and get the road reopened and get the fish moving smoothly through the culvert, the new culvert.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we authorize the temporary closure of Patrick Creek Road at milepost 8.41 on August 15th through August 31st to replace 2
We have a
culverts.
motion on the table.
Second.
And a second. Public comment? Oh, sorry,
I thought
Supervisor
you were going to bring
Gitlin?
it to the, but Heidi, could you come on back up here? I just had a quick question to ask you. What's the impact on the local population who accesses, ingresses and egresses that road?
I believe that there will be no residents, permanent residents that will be affected by it, and we will be doing notification, through the local media to alert people. And although we are asking for the 15-day period, we hope to be in and out of there much sooner than a 2-week period.
Thank you. Public comment? Seeing none, bring it back to the board. Kylie?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. Item number 28, approve and authorize the chair to sign the attached comment letter responding to the 2017 Caltrans District 1 U.S. Route 101 Draft Transportation Concept Report as requested by Assistant Director, Community Development Department, Mr. Hooper.
Back again. So I attached a copy of this TCR, Transportation Concept Report. This is a draft version of the document that's been released by Caltrans specific to District 1 for Highway 101. I hope you've all had an opportunity to look at. There is, I think, some interesting information in it.
Sure.
It's a long-range planning document, 20-year and a 50-year horizon, so it's projecting out relatively far into the future, but we did have some concerns with the draft, specific the concept of expanding the highway facility in the Smith River area to a 4-lane freeway. There's been significant capital improvement invested, Tallawedini Nation, Local Transportation Commission, Caltrans themselves, trying to achieve traffic calming, safety, and so obviously a 4-lane freeway would be a problem as far as that's concerned. There were some other minor issues, but I think the major point was the 4-lane freeway in Smith River, so hopefully you see that in the letter, and if there's anything in addition you would like to see added, today would be the day to do that because they actually extended out the comment period to today to accommodate this.
Thank you. Public comment? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the board. So this is our opportunity, as Mr. Hooper said. I think a lot of what we saw in the previous Caltrans draft transportation concept report reflected previous missions of this board, and a lot's changed since that time. Obviously, having a 4-lane freeway through Tallawedini Nation Reservation is not something that is acceptable to them, and it's probably not acceptable to this board any longer. Continuing on with that course, this is our opportunity, and me personally, I'd like to see Caltrans revise that and just not rubber stamp past board actions, but in this case, take on new direction, and this being one that we would not want to see those changes after massive capital investment, not only by Caltrans, not only the Local Transportation Commission, but also the Tallawedini Nation.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we approve and authorize the chair to sign the attached comment letter responding to the 2017 Caltrans District 1 Route 101 Draft Transportation Concept Report as requested by the Assistant Director of Community Development.
Second.
We have a motion on the table in a second. Kylie, can you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right, we'll move to item number 30, which is discuss and direct staff to research procedures on naming a mountain in the Siskiyou National Forest after fallen firefighter William Billy Jaros, as requested by Supervisor Howard. I went ahead and put this on the agenda. A constituent from Gasky contacted me not too long ago with the idea that oftentimes we should honor our fallen heroes. In this case, somebody who grew up in our community, served our community, and lost his life protecting us. And I thought it was a good idea that he had to try to find if there's a way through legislation which was enacted in the 60s in naming mountains. And it's my understanding there was a commission established to do that. As the constituent had requested this, I thought I'd bring it before the board because oftentimes we're faced with actions that sometimes our weight versus an individual constituent carries more when we're making requests nationally. And to that extent, wanted to ask the board the question, are we willing to commit some staff time into researching this to see if there is an opportunity to name a mountain in Gasky after Bill Jaros?
I think it's a great idea, and I think it's a time well spent.
Thank you.
Supervisor Cowan echoes my comments.
Very good.
I'm also good with it.
Very
Absolutely.
good. Public comment, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's been a long day today.
It sure has.
Well, I'm finally able to address the board, my supervisors, your fine, outstanding looking young gentleman and young lady. I just wanted to let you know I'm new in the community and I look forward to your behavior and see how you guys take care of our community. And naming a mountain after a fallen hero of that nature, I think that's an outstanding idea. The only idea is, will you put it on the map so when tourists come through, you can say or point to the direction of that mountain so we can honor the individual as well. I think it's important that we recognize all our heroes, whether they be veterans in war or in peace, okay? Because firefighters put their lives on the line a lot, police officers do the same thing. So to commemorate a mountain in their behalf and honor them is a great opportunity to grant them that peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
Thank you, sir. My name is Don Cannon Cutts. I'm a very proud resident of Gasky. As the chairman said, Bill was a Del Norte native and a graduate of Del Norte High School. When I asked Tiffany Meyer, who would spearhead this effort to name the mountain at the state level, she works for CAL FIRE, by the way, but she's also chairperson of chairmember of a board that handles geographic naming of features here in the state of California. Her reply was, well, they're going to look for a reason. That what did he do for the community? So I'm going to take this moment and tell you what he did for the community. He had a wicked sense of humor. Personally, I never met him, but everybody said he had a great sense of humor. But here's what he did. Working for the Foreign Service, he went around and gathered all the Smokey the Bear paraphernalia he could come up with. I mean, Smokey's kind of drifted by the way. My generation remembers it well. You're all obviously too young to remember Smokey the Bear, but anyway, he'd find stuff in warehouses or stuck in drawers, and he carried it with him. He carried it on engine 312 with him. And when he was sent to a fire, if he visited a shelter where families and children were taken from their home by this disaster we call a wildfire, he'd pass out this Smokey the Bear stuff to the children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Public comment. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. We have a motion and a second on the table. Or just your consensus then, board? Very good. All right. We're going to go ahead and move to item number 31. Consider miscellaneous legislative and budget matters pertinent to the County of Del Norte. CEO? Any today?
Nothing additional to what's on the agenda as far as letters. We'll give you kind of an update on AB 1250. It's still a really hot topic in Sacramento that has to deal with local contracting, and they're having continual discussions, but at this point it is still alive and well, but there have been some amendments. We'll see if it ever gets to be palatable enough to actually throw support behind.
Hopefully not. Very good. Item number 32, review the current budget priorities and obligations and give directions to staff as to new or reprioritized positions or services as requested by the county administrative officer. Jay?
So as the board is more than familiar, if they've talked to me at all or have been, listen to any of my reports that I give at the end of the meetings, we are in a budget process, and we are about to be going into the last 2 months of that process. It's obvious right now that we are in deficit. However, we'll know what that deficit is, I'm hoping, this week. There's some reconciliation of a couple of funds that will help us then start going down that final road. In the past, there has been general direction given by the Board of Supervisors regarding priorities of the individual boards, and we have new board members, and I thought it would be opportune to at least have this discussion over any priorities that are in place, and then perhaps if there are any changes in those priorities. I think the board understands that we generally are not working with surplus funds. So we're working towards zero typically from the bottom up. And if there are any funds beyond that, then those could be directed towards, in most cases, one-time expenditures. Many of those times it's augmenting the capital improvements fund, or a couple of years ago there was money put in as a designated reserve. Very modest at $100,000, but that was a step. Currently, we are faced with certain requirements too as part of our budget. It's all dictated by California code. And so, mandated programs, whether they be completely allocated funding through the state of California, if they be those general fund departments that you're mandated to provide services. And typically I use community development as the example because everybody's very familiar with building inspection and planning and engineering. All of those, they're general fund expenses. However, we have to have building inspections in the state of California. You have to have planning zoning laws. So all of those are not necessarily, the level of staffing is typically within the board's purview, but the fact that you have to have them is mandated. Other types of fairly regular budgeting that the board has directed in the past was a contingency fund, which is typically emergency money. It takes a 4/5 vote to utilize that money, but it is set aside in those cases where something might happen during a fiscal year that requires funding that was not budgeted in another budget. Examples of that are, if you have some type of unforeseen emergency in regards to the one that was very significant a few years ago was the flooding of the DA's office. Ultimately, we did get reimbursed for that, but we had to have money in the budget in order to actually cover costs up to the point where the insurance would reimburse. Those are the types of issues that happen when you have a lot of structures. That's probably the most glaring type of an example, but unforeseen is the big word. We've maintained a capital improvement budget. It took several years, but the board budgeted excess money, if you want to call it that, or surplus money, in order to get the roof on this building done. That was 15 years beyond the date that it was hoped to be able to get it done. We were able to get through those 15 years with a few leaks, but it's now at least a 25-year project that we don't have to worry about. Capital improvements, or the capital infrastructure budget, generally deals with all of the buildings that we own. You know, maintained buildings of those that are leased, most of those costs will be associated with an individual budget, but infrastructure is one of those that is typical projects of 20,000 or more, and we don't do a lot of new construction, but remodeling and correction of issues. Most of those usually deal with big ticket items like roofs. One of the priorities in here that I listed as number 6 was the augmentation, basically, of the general reserve fund. The next one was fully funding of a county engineer position within the community development department, and fully funding a position that addresses resource needs. We have not been able to do the last 2 at all over the last several years because they're ongoing costs, and have been able to find other ways to provide those services. But as far as the general reserve, I think it was 2 fiscal years ago we were able to put a little bit away. We weren't able to do that last year. Considering where we're at in our budget this year, I'm going to guess that we're probably looking at being able to try to cover the current priority 1 and 2, and we have currently budgeted the $100,000 in the contingency fund and $100,000 in the capital improvement fund. Beyond that, we have the annual debt service obligation to the Border Coast Airport Authority also, and that isn't due until the end of this fiscal year, but it would be on June 30th. There are some things that we might be able to do to fund it for the next year, but that would be what we need as we get towards a balance. So the idea today was to look at those and then get any feedback from the Board of Supervisors. If there's reprioritization, add those to that list. If you want to move them up the list, move them up the list. I would just need consensus of the board, and then I would sit down with the budget team and the auditor controller, who's part of the budget team, and we would go from there. Any questions?
Questions for Jay?
Jay, just a quick question. Are you saying that on the contingency fund to increase the surplus, it's currently at 100,000 right now, is that correct?
The contingency fund is separate from the general reserve fund.
Okay,
those
so
are 2 different
right
funds.
now, the general reserve fund is 100,000. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and are we talking about on a priority of increasing that another 100,000 based on what I'm hearing from you? Total 200,000?
That could be a priority that exists. Whether or not we can afford it will happen in the next 2 months.
Understood.
Obviously, what will happen in reverse order, those will drop off if the funding is not available up to the point that, mandated programs and the contingency fund possibly, but it really depends on what's available financially.
So right now, in the input that we're really going to offer you today from the individual board members is based on the fact that of unknown, we don't know what the when the dust settles, what the deficit is, or how high or how low, or if it even will exist, based on the reckoning of the budget. So these are more like wishful kind of opportunities. Is that what?
Yeah, and
until we have resolution on that.
Not from individuals, but from the board as a direction as a whole. That way we know that when we get to that final budget push, that we are meeting your directives as best we can.
So my understanding is, because we are in deficit, that basically items 1 and 2 we need to do. And then going down from there, if we're not okay with the way they are listed, possibly changing those around.
Correct.
Okay.
Or adding one that doesn't exist.
Yes. But
Correct.
basically, we're at 1 and 2, and that's probably all we can do.
Correct.
Okay.
Very good. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Mr. Chairman, at the June 13th board meeting, I suggested a priority funding item that I'm interested in. At the time, I said we believe, or at least I believe, that we should set aside an agreed amount of money that will fund streets and roads in areas that are not now considered county-maintained roads. This should be a fund that would cover all 5 districts in the county on an equal basis. Whatever that amount is decided on, each district would have an equal amount, and each supervisor would have discretionary authority over those funds for that district. Secondly, I suggest that our county TOT allocation be reevaluated. When one area of the county contributes almost 1/3 of the county's TOT, and yet only receives a little bit of, well, 2% of the total county's TOT for marketing, it's time we took a fresh look at this allocation and had it reflected on next year's budget. I'm hoping that maybe we could discuss this item at the next or September board meeting.
Very good. It's, since we are prioritizing today, we could also choose to discuss today if it's something that you would like to see potentially in this prioritization.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is a reallocation of our TOT funds. For example, the 2% that I was talking about is Klamath. Klamath Chamber of Commerce receives about 2% of the total. Actually, in Klamath contributes, if I'm not mistaken, and Kylan could speak to this if he would, they contribute $74,000, about 1/3 of our TOT, and yet only receive for marketing $2,500. I don't think this is an adequate allocation, and I'm looking to see maybe if we can discuss the options that might be available at a future board meeting.
Jay, are you looking for this to be set in stone today to provide some direction on what comes in, what moves out? Because some of these discussions could get a lot broader than maybe what you intended.
I'm looking for general direction to prioritize these so that we can start, depending on what that final push is. If we're in a deficit, many of these priorities have to drop off because we cannot afford those. The other part of the discussion, which could happen now or it could happen during the public hearing for the budget, would be the allocation of funds. Something as to the TOT has a significant effect throughout the general fund budgets, because if that TOT is reallocated to another source, it's now not available to the general fund as a revenue. So those are the types of things we would have to discuss.
Understood. Thank you. Supervisor Gitlin.
Since we're bringing up, and again, pre-Christmas wishes, I mean, I've for a long time felt that the emphasis on code enforcement and the window of our community to people who come and visit and who live here has, because of economics, long been, well, let's say, put down the list of priorities. So I'd like to see an additional amount of monies allocated to CDD for code enforcement in an effort to bridge some of the problems we have in removing unsightly messes, and that we simply don't have the money to operate. We seem to be operating under this, it's almost July 1st, so we can schedule this last part of June and this part of July, and then we exhaust those monies, and it's never enough, and it has stayed the same for a long time. So I'd like to see that considered on our priority list of an additional enhancement to the CDD budget directed toward code enforcement.
Jay, I have a question too along those lines. So let's say with the issue we have in Smith River on Fred Haight Drive with the fires that occurred, and now letters having gone out where potentially the county would be stuck with the bill to clean up the fire damage and at potentially large cost. We're out of our budget generally if the board were to make a decision to clean up the cost, where would that come from?
Well, it usually comes out of the code enforcement budget, but at this point, with the potential for exorbitant costs, if the board is committing to a full cleanup and assessment of hazardous materials, that's going to be a very large cost. You would probably have to prioritize your contingency or the capital improvements budget, because those are the two that are being currently set aside in order to be able to pay for, they're essentially straight general fund costs. Each one of the ones that have been mentioned have general fund ramifications, and so if they are priorities of the board, we would put those in. They would fall off correspondingly if we don't have the money to be able to fund those by the end of this fiscal year or this budget process.
Very good, thank you. Further comments from the board? I'd like to move to public comment. This is your opportunity to weigh in on some board prioritizations for our budget.
Mr. Chairman, are we missing item number 33?
But we're still on item number 32,
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
public comment.
Kylan Hunter of District 5. I understand you guys have a very tough decision and a very tough job, as Bob brought up. The Chamber of Commerce is looking to build up economically Klamath and to run a marketing campaign, and that's what we would like the funds for. I'm not going to tell you that we should get this money over other things that have higher priority, but if there's a way that we could, increase our budget. We do produce quite a bit of TOT, and the goal of the marketing campaign would be to increase that further, so that we would get more people coming to Klamath, so that we would be generating more revenue and lifting up Klamath economically in the process. We are very much a tourist-based economy down there right now, and over the next 5 years, with fishing disappearing, we're going to be hit even harder. And as further evidence that this type of work or this type of campaign would work, the businesses in Klamath saw a huge increase in 2016. We attribute that to the marketing campaign that was being done by the national parks, and we would like to continue to do something specifically for Klamath so that we can continue to grow and be prosperous. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Because I've had these conversations with Jan, and Wortman and I have talked about this, and I guess my question is, I know we don't get TOT from the new casino and hotel, so are they helping in this campaign with funds?
We've talked with them, and the funds that go into the tribe, it's my understanding that that goes directly into Yurok Country, which is their marketing campaign for the area. And so they are doing what they should be doing with their TOT. They're putting it directly into marketing for the area. Yes, it's Yurok-centric, but they overall are marketing the area and trying to get more people. In their conversations with them, that money is designed to get people to come to Klamath and to stay longer, and that benefits everyone, not just the tribe.
So there is a marketing campaign going on with those funds down there already?
Yes. That is my understanding.
Supervisor.
Kylan, how many members are there in the, I'm pleading ignorance on this, in the Klamath Chamber of Commerce? How many members do you have?
75.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, further public comment? Bring it back to the board. You know, and this one I have been beating on since I've been on the board, and I kind of want to get back to where Bob's talking about TOT, and I think we need a lot broader discussion on TOT. We've had recent reports from the Del County Chamber of Commerce, Visitors Bureau. I know we have representation on both. We've had a lot of investment over the last decade of basically TOT dollars, which obviously move into our general fund, but with the idea that those TOT dollars that move into a marketing budget, in this case to the Chambers of Commerce, both Klamath, both Del Norte, that those monies would have a return on investment. And arguably, those monies have had a significant return on investment since those investments were made in 2007. The county TOT has almost doubled. Now, people could speculate why it's doubled, but for those maybe working in the industry, it's pretty clear. But that investment has pretty much stayed stagnant. And for whatever reason, this board has not chose to continue increasing that investment and hope that that would also increase returns to our general fund. Those kind of discussions, I think, need to be had, because I don't personally, after having sat on this board for 2.5 years, see any other revenue sources coming into our general fund that will help secure public safety, help secure our agricultural commissions, help secure our dog pound, because our property tax continued to slide, our sales tax continued to slide, our gas tax continues to be taken from. But the one thing that has not only remained stable, but also increased, has been TOT. And I don't want to sit up here and preach, but from a business perspective, if I were running this board or our general fund budget with the idea that we could get additional funds from marketing our community, which is heavily tourism based, with the idea of filling those extra beds that are always out there with heads that will bring that TOT revenue, then I'd certainly want to take a long look at that. So, Supervisor Berkowitz, I understand that probably not a great time for that discussion now, but certainly a good time for that discussion maybe at our next board meeting, and I'd certainly be willing to agendize that. I know that does not give staff clarity on maybe allocation to the Klamath Chamber or an additional allocation to our local Chamber of Commerce, but I do think the discussion needs to be had. Any further direction for another time? How do you see this playing out, guys?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to see this as a continuing discussion because things may drop off, things may be added. I know it's fluid, and I know that it doesn't give staff specific direction, but I think it needs to be fluid because I think things change even in the next month.
Thank you. And I don't see our priorities as far as specific to priorities 1 and 2 changing. I see those as being our top priorities. Things below that line potentially might change depending on the board's will. But I do want to see this discussion continue, and I don't want to see it end today just because we're going long. Maybe working with staff, we could look to agendize this and continue the discussion when we have a little bit more time on our agenda. Supervisor Hemmingson.
And I guess that's the question. Are you looking at consensus on adding these items that were brought up as priorities, or to put them on our list? Because I've got some concerns about several of them.
It would be a consensus of the board to add these to this existing list.
So this is the discussion we're going to have later,
and
Chairman?
You know, I guess I'd like to have this discussion. I'd just like to take more time to do it. I mean, having a discussion about priority items for the board on how we expend our limited general fund dollars if we weren't in deficit and things were to grow a little, I think needs to be hatched out without trying to race towards closure today because everybody's blood sugar is getting extremely low. But Jay,
we can put it on the next agenda also. That's not a problem. We will have a better understanding at the next agenda what our actual deficit is once the year end is done. In terms of bringing forward a balanced budget, knowing that this board has certain priorities makes it much easier on us to focus on those. However, it isn't a guarantee that we have the funding available to actually fund those.
Sure.
The ultimate responsibility for me is to bring forward a balanced budget. 1 and 2 are definitely those focuses because we have to. Once we get below that, then certainly the input of the board, we would start hitting on those as best we could.
Thank you. So it's clear based on some input today that maybe some priorities of the board have changed. I think in 2 weeks, we come back together, we'll have this agendized. I'd like to agendize the topic of TOT and that reinvestment as a separate item. But as far as those priorities, we'll go ahead and take that up at the next meeting, and I'd encourage those board members with those special issues, whether it's code enforcement or whether it's streets and roads, to have some more detail and how that mechanism might work so we could direct staff properly if we were to prioritize it.
And certainly, the Community Development Department has to be involved in those discussions because they're the ones that bring forward the requested budget by law, and then the board makes any decisions on how they want to allocate the funds for those.
Thank you. All right, we're just going to go ahead and move to item 33, which is approve and authorize the chair to send a letter to Congressman Huffman urging to create a bill that establishes funding for the last chance grade as requested by Board of Supervisors. We have a letter on the table. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to send the letter.
Very good.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Public comment. No worries.
I may be telling you something you already know.
Please state your name for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Donald Cannon Cutts. I live in Gasky. I may be telling the board something they already know, but the congressman's going to be here in Crescent City on August the 15th. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, public comment. Supervisor Blackburn, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Board. It's nice being here again. I guess Kurt didn't come back. We got here early, but yeah, an extended schedule. But anyway, I'm hoping that we get a 5-0 vote on this. I traveled to Eureka with my wife Friday, and it was unbelievable to me, the failures up the hill and all the way down through last chance grade. The problem with these failures are all roads giving away underneath, and those are major. But this certainly is an emergency situation. In my discussions with Gary Strike from Federal High Administration in Denver last September twice, and with Paul Snyder, Lori, I believe, didn't you meet Paul Snyder? This recent trip by our state senator. Talked to both those gentlemen and asked them the question, what if it goes tomorrow? What are you going to do? And they said, we need to declare an emergency and we get this thing through as quick as we could, which I truly believe is the answer that will happen. What we need for it to happen is this is an emergency declared through you to our congressman to get this into the works right now. And I know the environmental delays are big time, but I think that those can be overcome if they're overcome in the right way. And that 1 mile stretch behind that mountain is a logical way to go. So with that, I wish you the best. I hope that you can support this totally, and that we can get the politicals at the upper levels moving on this, and the urgency that we have in this community, because it is urgent, as you all well know. Thank you so
very much, Supervisor. Public comment. Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Kylie, can you please poll the vote?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, on this. I know it calls for a signature by the chairman, considering the often division we have on our board. This is something all 5 of us on this board agree. I wonder if you'd consider having this a 5 wet signature letter being sent to the congressman.
Is there an issue with that, council? Nope. Very good. Then by consensus. Very good. All right. We'll move to item number 34, which is our board reports. And Supervisor Cowan, could you please kick us off today?
I had a meeting with Rob Christensen from Senator McGuire's office. We covered many topics from homelessness, veterans, last chance grade, environmental cleanup options, and the hospital. I appreciate the contact and the effort from the Senator's office and himself. He's very hands-on with our community, and it shows his commitment to us. He shows it to us on a regular basis, and I appreciate that. I had a meeting with some veterans. I've been meeting with this group pretty regularly, discussing the homeless problem directly in the county, both immediate fixes as well as long-term. So we're usually talking about No Place Like Home with them and giving them updates on that. I attended the chamber mixer and grand opening in Breeze Salon. Rachel Marlar and I had another meeting. I had missed the last meeting with College of the Redwoods and Sutter Coast Hospital as they're going forward trying to get the RN program back, so got an update on that. Had many conversations and emails with the FPPC regarding the Oxford House. Had a meeting with Mitch Hanna over at the hospital. We again talked about College of the Redwoods and what's going on there, and the group that came up from Auburn to talk about the RM program and implementing it here, the stabilization unit, and a lot of changes that are going on at the hospital. They've started, if anybody's been in the back, the groundbreaking and the starting the build of the dialysis center and the transfusion center has started. Met with board members from the California Endowment. We were in town last week and discussed everything that's going on with the healthcare initiative here with BHC and the progress that's been made here in Del Norte County. Attended our monthly mental health meeting and covered many items including housing, continual care, and the 3-year plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Supervisor Gitlin.
Well, it's a relatively quiet week for me during this midsummer time. Took a little time off, reconnect with family down south. But I did attend the 61st anniversary of the In God We Trust motto down in Bakersfield. It was passed by the Congress back in 1956. Upon my return, I spent some time, a little extra time at the Del Norte County Fair, enjoying myself and looking at some of the displays, which we all often just walk by real quickly and we don't look at them, and see kind of workmanship and craftsmanship goes into fuchsia display or some of the furniture. I really enjoyed that. This past week, we conducted our 27th Take a Bite Out of Blight cleanup over here in our district, just south of Washington Boulevard. These perpetrators who continue to engage in this criminal behavior, I would say to you, you're going to get caught, and then there will be some severe consequences. Take your trash to the transfer station or call Recology, and they'll deliver a bin to you, modest cost, and dispose of your trash accordingly. I've also asked for CDD to put up anti-dumping ordinance signs at these places as a way of saying, please don't do this. And more often these assaults happen in the middle of the night when no one is aware, and then they're gone quickly. I also sat down with Gene McVeigh, and we had a very productive meeting on Oxford House Sequoia, where he answered all of my questions about the Clean and Sober House in 2013, over 230 Loft, excuse me. And then finally, we're now heard the news with regard to Penn Air's Chapter 11 ongoing proceeding and the ultimate closure of its Portland hub. It's uncertain where we're going to stand. I'm hopeful that we can find a carrier to continue air service from Crescent City to points perhaps that can fill the planes up a little more quickly. I don't know what size airplane we're going to qualify for due to the fact that we have a shorter than jet friendly field here. So that was my week, and that's my report.
Thank you. Supervisor Henningsen.
Yes, thank you. I had a whale entanglement conference call. We had a Harbor City County meeting discussing financial issues, and we actually all three have some financial issues. The county has the airport, the harbor has their infrastructure, and the city has a sewer plant. So we're all trying to find ways of trying to help out a little bit. Had a resource conservation district, resource conservation and development meeting. Went to Health and Human Services, was invited to a presentation by Mike Pallison, who's with Rural Communities Housing Development Corporation, on the housing homeless to go along with our No Place Like Home issues that we've been talking to Senator McGuire about. And had a meeting with Senator McGuire, or actually was invited, as were all the supervisors. I was the only one who attended. He invited us all down to a Crabs baseball game, which was very interesting. I hadn't been down there since I played in the All-Star game close to 50 years ago, so it was interesting. Still a very nice field, and they've got some great improvements planned there. But did get a chance to talk to the senator one-on-one, as well as Rob Christensen, and the group from Santa Rosa was there also. Attended the fair as well as the rodeo, and as you probably have all heard, Randy Hatfield is retiring this year, will no longer be the fair manager, so they'll be looking for a replacement. Those will be big shoes to fill. Had a Natural Resource Goal Committee meeting yesterday. We had some discussion on the Yurok lands legislation. Congressman Huffman's, I'm still calling it a wilderness bill, but it's called something different, and the Pacific Shores monitoring station update. That was it for me.
Thank you. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 weeks ago, Supervisor Hemmingson and I met with 2 members of the Harbor Commission and 2 members of the City Council. The objective was to see if we could come up to a meeting of the minds to keep the harbor from going bankrupt in 4 or 5 years from now. We discussed a number of options, but no decisions were made in the best way to solve this problem, and we do hope the harbor the best. Had a meeting with Michael Thornton, who is the Executive Director of True North, in which we discussed a number of items of mutual interest. Had a meeting with Kylan Horner, who's right here today, and John Thompson of the Trees of Mystery, and they educated me. They pointed out that $76,000 that the chamber receives, or excuse me, that the county receives from the TOT in Klamath, and the Klamath Chamber only gets $2,500. They pointed out that this is not a fair apportionment of TOT money, and I definitely agree. They asked the Board of Supervisors to look at several options that they would have to promote the Klamath area as a gateway to Del Norte County, and that's the subject we just discussed. This year, as in the past 30 years, I have attended the Del Norte County Fair. Seemed to be well attended, and looked like there were more commercial vendors this year than I remember in past years. So it seems like it was a great success, and of course everybody was honoring Randy Hatfield for his years of service. And that's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor. Yeah, very, always busy weeks, but I'll cover a few, try not to repeat myself. Had great conversations with board members from the California Endowment, specific to the literacy programs that we've implemented here in our community and the sustainability of those programs long term. And it really appears that the movements that many folks in this community have made with the support of the California Endowment through the Building Healthy Communities program towards literacy have really taken a foothold within our schools. And we've seen a lot of great results since the implementation of many of these programs, but there's still a lot of work to do to get to our goals of 3 Read 23. And I was glad to see the support there for it. We're also working with the California Endowment Building Healthy Communities program towards food security and other ways that we could look at, more importantly, how food insecurity affects youth in our community and look towards models outside our area. Had long discussions with members of the Oxford House Sequoia. I was glad they opened up their homes to us, and I learned quite a bit about their programs. It's good education, more importantly. It helped enlighten me about what was going on here today. I attended a gender review, had many conversations about our concerns on Fred Haight Drive with the arson fires that took place and how we're going to get towards a point of cleanup when we might potentially, as a county, have to abate and do that cleanup ultimately if those landowners become delinquent in getting that job done. Had several discussions with John Driscoll from Congressman Hoffman's office, and more specifically on the lands legislation that Supervisor Hemmingson mentioned, and even as it relates to the EuroAct portion of that legislation, which we continue to have a great deal of discussion on. Had conversation with Dwayne Reichlin from the Healthcare District, specific to some work that they're doing with Sutter Coast. And then I'll make mention, as it was brought up here today, about Congressman Huffman's visit on August 15th. I think it'll be important, and I know he's here specifically to talk to us about that lands legislation, but it'll also be important for the board to bend his ear while he's here on our priorities. And then finally, I'll close by saying congratulations to my son Bryce. He's on the streets, folks. He just passed his driver's permit test today. Fortunately, he'll have parental supervision for a while, but just be careful. Look for me. I'll be having the giant flag like you see on the back of dune buggies for a while until he's fully licensed. Thank you. Appreciate your time today and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.